501. As Nisha had promised, it took a handful of hours to complete our ascent up the cliffs. Although strenuous, the rest of the climb was uneventful. Twice, flying mana beasts circled around to investigate our hunting party, but they were kept at bay by warning flares of mana. The mountain itself, which had birthed golems to test us, was silent. At the top, the four phoenixes began to shout and crow, their voices echoing through the thin air in the high mountain ravines, welcoming each member of our hunting party. When we'd all reached the dell, our group of 20 hunters stopped to look out over the cliff's edge. It was impossible to see how high we'd climbed, as clouds covered the surface of Epheotis far below us. A pod of skyrays crested in and out of the clouds, swirling over, under, and around each other playfully. Regis manifested out of Ellie's dim shadow, and the armor cladding her melted away, returning to the ether. She immediately wrapped her arms around herself as a shiver ran through her. Chal clapped my shoulder hard enough that I had to step forward to catch myself. Just like the abyssal rays we faced in the relictums, my brother. I don't remember those ones being quite so cute, Sylvie said, kneeling next to the edge. She picked up a smooth stone and rubbed it between her fingers, then casually tossed it off the edge, watching it plummet into the mist. Ribbon Cawthon gasped and clutched his horns in horror. What are you doing? That could kill someone. Sylvie froze, her face pale with guilt. The Asuras began to laugh, Riven loudest among them. I'm only joking. You may be Archon in name, Sylvie, but you have the stiffness of a dragon. The dragons among us stopped laughing. The rigidity of a basilisk, you mean, one of the Indraths said. Instead of taking offense, Riven and his basilisk companions' laughter was renewed by the jibe. Viria Inthira craned her back in a deep stretch, her long pink hair nearly spilling to the ground. Straightening, she turned away from the panorama and gazed up toward the mountain's peak. The light is dimming quickly. We should make camp. Nisha of Ignis, who led the way out of tradition, gestured to the thickly forested, green swath carved into the mountain. We'll remain unmolested by the flying beasts if we move up into the treeline. Otherwise, pick a spot. Regis gave a throaty chuckle. But what if we want to be molested by some flying beasts? Then I suggest you do it privately behind a tree so none of us will judge you, one of Riven's basilisk friends said with a laugh. Nisia's cheeks flushed bright red, and her citrine eyes went wide as they jumped around the members of our hunting party. That's not what I sighed. Just ignore Regis. Your embarrassment will only encourage him. Despite the long day's ascent, most of the Asuras broke into a run, racing each other up the gentle slope and shouting about getting the best spots first. Chul joined them, forgetting himself, but I let him go. The grinning warrior was in good company as he and one of the basilisks pushed and shouldered one another, laughing the entire time. The rest of my clan stayed close, and both Zelena and Viria lingered behind their own clans. We made our way more slowly, at ease. We'll rest and recover our strength for the evening. Zelena, walking ahead of me, didn't look back as she spoke. Tomorrow, we scour the summit for our prey. What exactly are we hunting? I asked, watching the Leviathan woman's hair move out of rhythm with the cold, gusting wind that blew through the dell. Viria, who walked alongside Sylvie, but was careful to keep some distance between my clan and herself, answered. Our prey will present itself to us. When you see it, you will know. Her liquid silver eyes rested on me for a long moment, then skated away, inscrutable. I frowned at that, but the conversation ended there. As we entered under the sprawling, gnarled limbs of the giant trees, Chul gave a shout and waved us toward a flat spot between three massive trunks. Take a moment to connect with your clan, Zelena said, breaking away toward the other Leviathans. Food and drink will be shared later, and then conversation and stories. First, though, settle your mind. I watched her go with a strange feeling of nakedness. She had a way of seeing right through me with a wisdom far beyond her years. The moment I finished the thought, I almost burst out laughing, reminded that she was 20 times my own total age, maybe even more. They are all more than they seem, Sylvie projected into my thoughts. The youngest of them is, what, half a century old? Ellie grabbed my arm and tried to drag me toward Chul. Come on, I'm starving. Chuckling, I let myself be pulled along in her wake. Chul was already arranging a circle of stones to contain a fire, and Ellie wasted no time drawing equipment from her dimension ring and setting camp. Throughout the wooded dell, campsites were being completed for each group of 4. The different Asuran races each favored a specific experience. The Leviathans, for example, were quick to set up brightly colored tents made of dense fabric, while the phoenixes mostly roosted in hammocks or conjured beds outside. The basilisks were sharing a single large canopy tent in which they built their fire. The dragons, on the other hand, were taking their time in building themselves each a kind of small house from conjured materials, complete with indoor space for cooking and bathing. As Zelena had suggested, each group was comfortable engaging just with their own kind for the moment. I withdrew a simple bedroll and laid it out by the fire pit as Chul finished arranging the large circle of stones. He had already dragged over a down tree, and he began ripping dry limbs off with his hands, snapping them into several smaller pieces, and tossing them into a loose pile. He hummed as he worked, occasionally smiling to himself, and so I let him continue without interrupting. When he was satisfied with the state of his pile, he summoned his weapon. Flames issued from the round, fissured head like a torch, which he stuffed into the wood. It caught immediately, roaring up 10 feet high. Above, the trees rustled as they leaned toward the warmth, dropping a few yellow leaves. Among the leaves were maroon flowers giving off a sleepy, sweet scent. Dream blossoms, Chul said, catching me looking up into the canopy. The flowers make a good strong tea, or so I learned in the hearth. I've never actually seen one before today. It is said that resting beneath them will make you sleep like the dead. So dead, in fact, that some never wake. Even heard a story one time about how a young phoenix warrior was eaten alive by a beast while he slept. I scoffed in grim amusement. Perhaps we should set a watch then, to make sure none of us sleep to death. Sylvie looked from her small but comfortable tent to the tree above it, which was covered in the maroon flowers. Maybe we should move back down the slope a bit. Regis looked up from where he had been sniffing around the campsite. Don't worry, milady, I'll ensure your beauty sleep isn't interrupted. Sylvie snorted and tossed a handful of fallen yellow leaves at him. Settling down on my sleeping roll beside the tall fire, Ellie wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. Ah, that wind is like knives through these sweaty clothes. Giving me a pleading look, she added, maybe I could get that armor again. Just to warm me up. Behind her, there was a faint pop, and Boo appeared as if from nowhere. He gave a deep moan and nuzzled my sister, lying down behind her. She leaned back, pushing into his fluff. Oh, that's better. Thanks for waiting, Boo. I don't think you'd have liked that climb. Her nose tipped toward her underarm, and she made a face. Maybe I'll have to ask the dragons to borrow their bath, too. How come none of you sweat that much? Boo let out a moan of agreement, making Sylvie and I both laugh. Asuras don't sweat, sister. Wait, really? She gave me an uncertain look. The perfume and soap makers of this world would be out of business if that were true. We all turned to see Viria approaching with a basket. She had changed out of the breeches and leathers she'd climbed in and now wore a simple teal and grey hooded dress. In the basket were a couple round loaves of bread and several glass jars that clinked together with each step. A gift from the Inthira clan. Prepared by my mother herself. She held out the basket with both hands. I took it in the same respectful manner. The jars contained honey, mustard, and jam to go with the bread. Thank you, she nodded, then took a step closer to the fire. As she stared into its depths, the flame's reflection danced over her silver eyes. Your clan did well today, Lord Arthur. That climb was no mean feat, even for Asura. Chul pulled the basket out of my hands, ripped off half a loaf of bread, and began to thumb through the jars as he chewed. Ooh, fireweed honey, my favorite. Off-handed, he passed the basket to Sylvie and walked off with his bread and the jar of honey. I wouldn't blame you if this all looked like some kind of gimmick from your perspective, I said in answer to Viria's comment. I won't pretend to be able to see events through your eyes. Her right hand drifted forward, seemingly an unconscious act. The flames flowed around her fingers, the heat itself twisting and moving to avoid burning her. No, I don't see it that way. If anything, it's exciting. There was a quiver in her voice, and I realized suddenly that this noble dragon was nervous. This is the first time in my life that I've experienced real change in Ephiodus. Those who remember Agrona's rebellion experienced such change, perhaps. Ribbon manifested out of the gloom around the campfire. It wasn't all it was cracked up to be, trust me. Of course not, Viria was quick to answer. I didn't mean to imply that it was somehow a time of good change. Violence between Asura is never good for Ephiodus. Hey, the shout came from one of the other campfires. Long strides crunched through fallen leaves in the dark, and then Nisha appeared. Her smoke-gray hair tumbled about her head in a wild mane, unbound from her braids. We agreed not to hound the great lord about you-know-who until everyone had settled in. You know who? I asked. As the words left my lips, I came to the answer on my own. You want to know about Agrona? Viria continued staring into the flame. Riven's eyes jumped to mine and away again, into the darkness. His brows were pinched with worry. Nisha sat down in the grass, her legs extended forward with her arms stretched behind herself for support. At some point, Zelena had joined us as well and was now leaning against a tree at the outer edge of the firelight. Although they didn't approach our fire, I could feel the other Asaurus straining to overhear what was said. Rumors spread like wildfire about Agrona's defeat at the hand of a lesser, Riven said, tense in both body and tone. But even my father has been quiet with most of the details. I let silence linger in the aftermath of Riven's statement. It was strange to me that Cassius hadn't spread the story far and wide, but then, he wanted a living, conscious Agrona to parade through the clan homes of these young Asaurus. Suspicion built in my mind that this conversation, which had been started by a dragon, was somehow calculated. There isn't much to tell, I said at length. Agrona had invested himself deeply into a separate source of power. I destroyed it, and he went into a kind of coma. Lord Indrath arrived shortly afterwards. Agrona and I never even fought. Oh, Riven's face fell. Clearly he had been expecting, or hoping, maybe, for a grander tale. While the others all seemed curious about the Agrona, there was something in Riven's expression that told me this was deeply personal. His older siblings had died fighting the Vritra clan, he'd said. I also knew the Basilisk race had suffered greatly following Agrona's defection to Alakria. I couldn't help but wonder if seeing Agrona receive a more public punishment would really help the young Basilisk or only reopen old wounds. You were impressive today, Lady Eleanor, Zelena said, her tone suggesting she was intentionally changing the subject. Viria piped up, adding, your magic really is quite interesting. Pure mana techniques, yes. Not unlike how the dragons use mana. Do you have any talent with ether, like your brother? Thanks, Ellie beamed. And no, I just use mana. I do have a spell form though. Nisha, who had eased back into a more relaxed posture again, frowned. A spell form, what's that? Pulling herself free of Boo's fluff, she turned and lifted the back of her jacket and shirt to reveal the spellform tattoo. It kind of, like, brands me with a spell. I can work a different kind of magic by channeling my mana into it. The Asaurus were enraptured, and began peppering Ellie with questions. After a minute or two, she gave a nervous shrug. Honestly, I'm not the expert. We have this master inventor, Gideon, who understands all this stuff. And my brother, too. The Alacrians use them, but they were invented by the Jinn. I could tell immediately that none of these Asaurus recognized the term. I've never heard of the Jinn. Is that another one of your lesser races? Riven asked, scratching absently at the scalp around one horn. I felt my teeth begin to grind before I took control of myself. They had no idea their entire civilization was built on the ashes of a dozen others. We call them ancient mages. They're no longer here, but much of their magic still lingers in our world. I shot Chull a warning glance not to explain further. Zelena finally stepped forward, coming to crouch beside the fire. The blue ridges along her temples shone iridescently in the firelight. To my sister, she said, I noticed that you did not make use of Silverlight on the ascent. Why? Ellie withdrew the unstrung bow, causing surprised murmurs to ripple through the Asaurus. I haven't been able to use it. How is it that a human girl comes to possess an Asuran weapon? Viria asked, glancing around at her peers. And the weapon of General Aldir, no less. It chose her, Zelena said defiantly. Whatever rumors you may have heard, know that Aldir of the Thyestes gave everything of himself for the betterment of both Ephiotis and the world of the Lessers. She stared around at the others, meeting their eyes one by one. It was a challenge, one that none of the other Asuran nobles were willing to meet. Your clan really is full of surprises, Riven said after an awkward pause. It's too bad we have no titans among us. They specialize in this sort of thing. Viria scoffed. They aren't the only ones knowledgeable about such things. Circling the fire, she sat down next to my sister, heedless of the warning rumble that came from Boo. Here, let me see. Quietly, Viria began instructing my sister in the methodology used by the dragons to master such weapons. Our conversation settled into comfortable small talk and jokes. Riven and Nisha had a lot of questions about my world, and I was too happy to answer most of them. The more the Asaurus knew about Decathon and Alakria, the more real those places would become in their minds. Food and drink were shared freely, and I nibbled a sweet, frosting-coated pastry as Riven's sister provided an impromptu lecture about Basilisk cuisine. Eventually, a friendly shout from the Basilisk campsite drew Riven and his sister away, after which Nisha bid us goodnight and returned to her own people as well. Chul joined her, eager to spend more time with the phoenixes of Ephiodus. Zelena stayed, although she retreated back to the shadows. For a time, we listened in silence to Viria's tutoring, but after a few minutes, Zelena waved me over. Sylvie's mind touched my own. I'm feeling fatigued, Arthur. I'm going to rest. I gave my bond a worried look, but she waved it away, her eyes flicking to Zelena. I nodded. Have you considered what the great lord said at dinner? Zelena asked without preamble when I joined her. It was cool at the edge of the firelight. The wind wasn't overpowering, but it was consistent and brought the cold down from the higher peaks. I turned my face into it and closed my eyes, enjoying the cold bite on my skin. We had a very long climb today, during which there was little else to do but think, I said, dancing around her question. You're uncomfortable with the idea. I met her eyes from the corner of my own. I already have someone. Zelena crossed her arms, frowning. What does that have to do with anything? You are a great lord, Arthur. And what's more, you are the founding member of an entirely new race and regent of your entire world. You need to solidify your position. Form strong alliances. Even spawn heirs. I coughed in surprise. She chewed her lip, suddenly reserved. Listen, I know very little of how your people do things. You are a good man to consider your love's feelings before making this decision. But the love of two may have to be weighed against the good of many. Her right hand snapped out in a lightning-quick punch that I only barely deflected. Her wry smile returned. I said before that your kindness may be transformational here. Glancing at Viria, she continued more quietly. Indrath will never uncurl his ironclad grip on Ephiodus. Not unless someone breaks his fingers. That someone is you, Arthur Lewin. But only if you have the strength and support necessary. She did not wait for my response, but turned and left for her own tent. She melted into darkness, but I followed the progress of her mana signature until it settled. When I returned to the fire, Viria was standing. Good night, Ellie. I look forward to seeing what you can do with this knowledge. Me too, my sister said with a yawn, her eyes glazed over with exhaustion. Viria stopped to give me a respectful bow, her hair, dark in the dim light of the fire, spilling out from under her hood, then continued back to the cabin she had constructed earlier. I sat down beside Ellie, patting her knee as she leaned against Boo, Silverlight still held in her lap. I love this, she said tiredly. Around us, evening continued to deepen into utter dark. I wasn't sure how long I waited, but eventually the last remaining Asura found their way to whatever bedding they'd prepared, and the camp settled and went quiet. Only the wind through the leaves and the low crackle of the fire could be heard. Gently, I eased Ellie up from where she'd fallen asleep against Boo and took her to her own tent, where I tucked her in the way Mom used to. Her eyes opened only long enough for her to give me a sleepy smile and say, "Thank you, big brother." Then her eyes closed and she returned to sleep, never having fully woken. Her tent was just barely large enough for Boo to fit in, and still his head poked out the front. He settled himself down, his chin on his paws, and closed his eyes as well. This place feels unbroken, Regis said quietly. He was sitting by the fire, his own burning mane moving like a dark purple shadow of the orange fire. I like it. Of course you do, I chuckled, easing down onto the bedroll next to him. Sensing his drifting thoughts, I patted his back beneath the flames. You're restless. It's fine, go. I don't plan on sleeping this evening. I'll keep the watch. He turned to face me, his tongue lolling. There was a wild light in his eyes. You sure? It's been a while since we've just hung out and bullshitted. I smiled and pushed him playfully. We live in each other's heads, Regis. He stood and loped off into the darkness, practically vibrating with the need to run. Just think really panicked thoughts if you need me. I was still smiling as his connected mind faded into the background of my own thoughts several minutes later. He was right about the mountain feeling untamed. But it was more than that. I could feel the border between Ephiodus and the Etheric realm. It wasn't visible, like at Ecclesia, but for some reason I couldn't quite put my finger on, that made it feel even more real, like if I could reach the summit, I would be able to touch the edge of the world. My eyes drifted closed. Inside the dusk of my own skull, I let the feeling of that atmospheric magic settle around me. Realm Heart activated, enhancing my sense of mana within the ether. King's Gambit lit up next, fracturing my conscious mind into 100 parallel thoughts. A single, detached thread immediately jumped to the forefront. How can a being live to be hundreds of years old and still act like a teenager? It was a rhetorical question. Maturity was a factor of necessity, not simply age. And looking at the Asura through the lens of human experience was largely fruitless. Largely, but not completely. When taken in context with what I'd seen and heard from these young noble Asuras, this question begged another, more important one. How can a child grow into maturity if nothing is expected of them? It wasn't entirely fair to say that the great clans expected nothing of them, but the reality was that these expectations varied greatly from a human heir. The word itself told half the story. Heir. What is the purpose of a successor if the current lords reigned for 10,000 years or longer? These Asura, all Asura, were caught in a kind of stasis, but that couldn't last. If I was going to save my world and Ephiodus, then both would need to change dramatically. Even without King's Gambit, it had been difficult to prevent my mind from going constantly back to my conversation with the other great lords regarding marriage. Now I was beginning to see it in a different light. What Zelena had said was true. It was a purely strategic choice, and one that worked directly into the necessity of a new vision for Ephiodus's future. But that did nothing to change how I felt. More importantly, how would Tessia feel if she knew these conversations were even happening? These thoughts eventually worked their way to the back as the forefront of my branching consciousness focused on my meditation and the mana. It was clearer, with my mind enhanced by King's Gambit, that the mana and ether here on the mountain felt like that which bound the portal between Decaden and Ephiodus. Although I'd seen the future in which I successfully relieved the pressure building in the etheric realm, not every aspect of how this was accomplished was clear to me. I needed more insight into the barriers that kept it separate from the physical world and allowed Ephiodus to float within. God's step ignited, adding another layer of awareness to the many threads of my consciousness. My perception began to expand outward like probing fingers. There was a twitch from Sylvie's sleeping mind. The first skill I learned with God's step was to move myself through the etheric pathways. After much training and effort, I'd learned to weaponize the pathways, striking through them with my conjured weapons. But I was confident there was still more potential. With the fountain and Everburn as my inspiration, I imagined a hole between the etheric realm and Ephiodus through which ether could pour in freely. Within the heart of our campfire, the probing fingers of my awareness reached for one of the infinitely interconnected points. It was a clumsy effort. Like muscle memory, I started to pass through the pathways while simultaneously attempting to hold myself back. The result was that nothing happened at first. Relegating a separate piece of focus to the disparate branches of my consciousness, I tightened my grip on the Godrune's power and my own stumbling manipulation of it. The atmospheric ether began to move. It was only a trickle, but the point of connection was now emitting ether. Purple light swirled within the orange flames. I pulled hard, and the campfire glowed violet. A claw tore through my concentration. My hands pressed hard against my temples as my senses collided like ships in a storm-tossed sea. Realmheart, God's Step, and King's Gambit were ripped from my mental grip. I watched as if from above as my fingers dug into my skull and I tipped onto my side, curling into the fetal position. Something was pulling me to it, absorbing me into itself. I resisted. Pain followed, incredible pain. A shared pain. Wordlessly, Sylvie was reaching out for me, for Regis, for whoever could hear and answer. I relaxed, finally understanding. The pain faded, and I found myself sliding faster and faster along the connection between our minds. Suddenly, I was back on the shoreline near Ecclesia. The entire sky was a swirl of pitch black and deep purple. I was not myself. Instead, I rode like a passenger behind Sylvie's eyes. She was standing on the surface of the motionless water, staring at the horizon where Ephiodus blended into the etheric realm. Sylv, what's going on? There was no response. Her focus began narrowing as she looked down at her feet. Sylvie's reflection in the glassy water was turned in the wrong direction. Beneath the water, these arms, not a reflection, flailed as she tried to swim toward the surface. With each movement, though, she only sank deeper. Slowly, as if in a trance, Sylvie, the one standing atop the water, bent down. Her hand passed easily through the surface. The Sylvie below grabbed her hand, and then was being pulled upward. But the figure that rose out of the water was not Sylvie's reflection. Standing before us, Sylvie's hand clasped in his own, was Agrona. He wore dark pants and a black shirt highlighted in gold and crimson. Golden chains and jewel ornaments hung from his horns. There was a smile in his red eyes. "What is this?" Sylvie asked, her voice hollow. "A dream, a vision, but it can't be. You're gone, defeated." Agrona's only answer was a wry, knowing smirk. "This is nothing, just the product of a stressed and tired mind," Sylvie told herself. Her eyes closed, but I could still see. Wake up. The coast, the ocean, Sylvie and Agrona, it all melted away. I was back on my bedroll beneath the dream blossoms. "Sylv, are you all Right, fine, I'm fine, she answered immediately. Did you see it too? I confirmed that I had. Maybe it was just the flowers, like Chul said. Yeah, maybe. I sat up and looked at her tent, which was closed off so I couldn't see her. You're worried. It was different from the vision about the Gladers, but it didn't feel like a dream. You've got a lot on your mind, I offered in consolation. All this talk about Agrona today clearly brought something to the surface. It's okay, whatever it is. I still worry, sometimes, she admitted after a few long seconds. He implanted that spell within me. Could take over my body. We've never fully understood why or how. I guess I just worry that he might have corrupted you somehow. I filled in, sensing the fear emanating from her. I am his daughter, Arthur. There is more of him in me than just his experimental magic. I guess, maybe I just wish I could have gotten more answers from him before he, you know. I didn't answer, but I didn't have to. She knew how I felt. I'm sorry, I'm tired, I'm going to try to go back to sleep. Chewing on my lip, I wished my bond good night. My senses remained on her aura until I felt it soothe as she eventually slipped back beneath the surface of consciousness. My own mind was too unsettled to return to my meditation. Instead, I weighed our options in the dim light of my golden crown. 502. I blew steam across the surface of my mug part way to my lips as I let out a laugh. The wyvern, Avier, was standing in the middle of a small round table between Mordain, Lyra, and me. At that moment, the green-feathered, horned owl was hopping from one leg to the other and speaking rapidly. And then she looks up at me, head in her hands, I can only see her eyes through her splayed fingers at this point, and says, I just don't know what to do with the boy, Avier. I either need to hang him from a gibbet, or make him a professor. Well, we all know how that turned out. My shoulders shook as I laughed, and I had to set down my mug before I spilled. Lyra Dryde was looking between the wyvern and me bemusedly. Mordain chuckled softly, his gaze focused into the middle distance. We were sitting together in Mordain's private study. The round walls were covered in curved shelves full of books, strange crystals, and a variety of knickknacks I didn't immediately recognize. He'd asked us to share tea with him once more before Lyra Dryde and I left the hearth. Ren Kane had already returned to Darv, loath to leave his work behind any longer. She knew he was the boy Agrona searched for, of course, but Cynthia expected there was more to him. Even then, Avier continued more seriously. Cynthia wasn't a seer, mind you, but she was clever. Perhaps the most clever person that I ever met. Arthur was more than just quadra-elemental. He understood mana on a level not possible for a boy of his age. Avier hesitated, then continued more softly. She even thought for a time he might be the legacy. Lyra Dryde clicked her nails against the side of her glass. Incredible, that she lived for so long after turning against Agrona. That one woman could hobble the information network of an entire continent, and against a deity no less. Agrona is no deity, I said harshly, then immediately felt the squirm of discomfort in my stomach as I realized who I was talking to. Glancing from Lyra to Mordain, I bowed my head. Ah, sorry. Mordain gave me an easy smile and waved a hand dismissively. He was sitting sideways in a chair of woven grass, one leg crossed over the other, a green mug held loosely in his other hand. The Asura are no deities, whatever rumors the agents of Keshus have fomented over the centuries. Ironically, though, Agrona himself is probably the closest thing to a deity this world has ever seen. Lyra's face fell. Because he created the Alacrians, you mean? Indeed. Though mad and undoubtedly evil, his genius can't be denied. To have created an entirely new race in his own image. Mordain shook his head ruefully. Avier ruffled his green feathers. I saw firsthand the lengths Cynthia went to just to escape the reach of the Vritra clan. In her darker hours, she would break down and weep as she detailed the depravities that she had participated in, all in Agrona's name. Forgive me, Lady Dryde, but I always struggled to see how anyone with a good heart could be born from such darkness. Is anyone born evil? Lyra asked, swirling her glass before draining it. Cynthia Goodsky and I were both forged into bitter implements by cruel masters. If we did evil, we did so because we were told it was good. We learned it, just as we eventually learned better. I don't know if all people are capable of such a change, but I have to believe they are. I felt myself frowning as I struggled to align the retainer's words with my own experience of Alacria. I find that the ability, or maybe, the willingness, to admit you've been wrong and to truly change is pretty exceptional. Lyra's answering look was uncertain. She didn't know if I was complimenting her or disagreeing with her. I supposed I was doing both. You are both correct, in my mind, Mordain answered, his blazing eyes suddenly piercing. The older one is, the harder, the more exceptional, it becomes to change. And yet sometimes outside pressure requires a metamorphosis, lest those same pressures crush you. Avier fluttered, taking a couple of hop steps toward Mordain. You're thinking of Chul. I am, Mordain answered absently. I knew when I agreed to let him go what it would mean. Cassius will understand who and what he is immediately, I am certain. I can only hope that Arthur's station will shield young Chul from immediate reprisal. So why let him carry the message? I asked, still confused about this point and glad that Mordain had brought it up. Since you know how to pass between the two worlds, you could have sent anyone, couldn't you? Avier, I reached out and stroked the owl's feathers, only afterward did I remember that he was no mere bonded beast but a wyvern of great power, as surely would have been capable. He ruffled again, his large eyes soaking me in with an expression I couldn't read. Mordain's smile turned wry. Chul's path is Arthur's path, now. To keep him back would have been to steal his purpose from him. Almost to himself, he continued, twice now I have put him at dire risk. He blinked, shaking off some buried emotion. There is no avoiding that danger. It does, though, force a very old man to rethink his decisions, both recent and past. Cassius knows that the Asclepius survive. I watched the ancient Asura uncomfortably. Sometimes he would speak and it would feel like a different language entirely, like I was a child listening to adults talk and just not getting it. Mordain had been generous with his time and the accommodations of his people within the hearth over the last day. I couldn't help but trust him, and I already considered him an ally. But I couldn't claim to understand him. He brightened suddenly, standing. Which is, of course, why I'll be sending one of my own to accompany you. There is no longer a point in hiding, and there is, perhaps, much we could offer this world, even if we cannot return home to Epheotis. Avier's overly large eyes blinked twice. Before speaking, he gave a reptilian croak. Mordain, are you certain? That is a large step, and so sudden. Taking a deep breath, Mordain closed his eyes and smiled up at the ceiling of the small, round study as if the sun were beaming down on us. Even in Epheotis, where time stands still, things are suddenly changing. A dam has broken, Avier. Can you not feel it? If there has ever been a time to do things suddenly, it is now. We left Mordain's study and flew along one of the wide tunnels that connected the various chambers of the hearth. Passing through a communal garden where food was grown, an arena of sorts where a handful of young phoenixes were wrestling, and a natural hot spring full of people lounging in the shallow water, we landed at the entrance of a narrow passage with a smooth floor. Mordain didn't speak as he led us into the short passage. The chamber beyond was bright and airy, covered with vents that I assumed allowed airflow from the surface. Fountains with constantly trickling clean water dominated one wall while orbs floated around emitting cool white light. Two phoenixes sat on a mossy log, one looking quite green while the other fawned over them protectively. Kneeling in front of the ill phoenix, Mordain exchanged a few kindly words, then continued on through the outer room into a narrow corridor that branched off into small, private rooms. Is this a healer's? Lyra asked, peering inside one open room. The only furniture was a cot, but the room's interior was bright and clean in a way that reminded me of the sterile hospital rooms at Xyrus Academy. It is, Mordain said without looking back. At the end of the corridor, he opened a door, one of very few I'd seen in the hearth, into a secondary room full of metal shelving, crates, and hanging plants. Two women were speaking quietly in the corner. Both looked up in surprise as we entered. Soleil, Aurora, Mordain smiled brightly. I come with a rather unusual request. Warm wind blew past us as we sped over the treetops, moving northward. Soleil, Lyra, and I clung to the golden frills that stuck out from Avier's gleaming green hide. His long neck swiveled back and forth with each beat of his wings as he searched the beast glades for any threat. As I considered the strength of the wyvern and phoenix, I couldn't imagine what beast could threaten us. Oh, I haven't been out hunting in ages, Soleil said, her neck twisting and craning almost as much as Avier's. The Asuran woman's gold-orange eyes flickered with internal light as her ashen blonde hair fluttered in the wind. And I haven't flown like this since I was just a child. Thank you for bringing me along. Thank you for coming, I said stiffly. In truth, I hadn't yet wrapped my head around the idea of escorting a phoenix out in the open. But Soleil's presence was to be Mordain's overture toward the rest of Decaden. Mordain must have a lot of trust in you. The Asuran woman bit her lip thoughtfully. I've been his student for thousands of years. I trusted him enough to leave behind our entire world and become a refugee here in Decaden. But the trust he placed in each and every member of our clan who elected to come with him is difficult to quantify. Any one of us could have doomed the rest, and yet our clan and culture survived this long. Lyra let herself slide back the length of a few frills in order to hear better. Do you think he's right to come out of hiding now? A soft expression smoothed Soleil's features. No one can see all ends, and even the great lords can still make mistakes. But his intention is pure, and his gaze reaches longer than most. I've risked everything for his vision once before, and I am happy to do it again. I couldn't explain it, but a melancholic silence descended on me like a great weight. Soleil seemed happy to watch the beast glades speed by, and Lyra was outwardly focused on returning to her people. Neither complained when I receded into myself. What is this pressure? Constricting my chest. I searched for a source to the rising fear, worry, and sadness, but the source was as formless as it was expansive. The world was changing, continuing to change, but I didn't know if I could keep up with it. What if I fail again? The question was like a knife of anxiety sticking into my chest. It was an old fear, pervasive and gripping, grown within the soil of my many errors and fertilized by the corpses of those I'd led into combat. I knew I couldn't shake it off or pretend like it didn't exist, and so I sat with the tired melancholy, accepting it as the necessary price of my experience. And it was no wonder. Everything is changing, like Mordain said. Avier landed on the strip of brown grass and fallen trees that separated Elenoir from the beast glades. There was a small Alacrian settlement a half-mile or so to the west, but Lyra had asked that we not fly directly into it. The last time a giant flying beast had appeared in the sky over the refugee villages, many Alacrians had died. Lyra led, her steps quick but not rushed. Avier transformed back into the comparatively small form of an owl and rode on Soleil's shoulder. For her part, the Phoenix woman looked almost nervous as we approached the gray village on the edge of the gray wasteland. A shout went up from a pair of guards when we were still several hundred feet from the nearest building. A battle group formed, setting themselves before us. Once we were close enough to make out individual details, however, they relaxed. In the meantime, a bare-chested, bronze-skinned man had rushed out of the village, a wicked-looking glaive in both hands. "Jaimin," Lyra said, picking up her pace slightly as we came within earshot. "Any news?" The man with the chiseled features activated a dimensional storage artifact in the shape of a belt buckle and stowed his weapon. "We fought off a pack of black-fanged wolves yesterday. Their hides are already curing. A few of us have fallen ill with some kind of coughing sickness. Nothing else worth telling." His dark eyes met my own briefly, then settled on Soleil. "What of your own task?" Understanding his unasked question, Lyra said, "The message is sent. We have no way to know if it'll reach Arthur, nor if he'll be able to return. Still, we have our own tasks. To me," she said, "Lady Tessia Aerolith, Princess of Elenoir. This is Jaimin Gwed, once named Blood and High Mage of the Ascenders Hall in Eitri. And this," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Jaimin, this is Soleil. One of the Asura, a phoenix." Jaimin, who has been closely inspecting the Asura, didn't seem surprised by this. I suppose the gold-orange eyes and the fiery mana signature did mark her as something other than human. "Tessia Aerolith, I have heard your name, and that of your grandfather, Virion. An honor to have you among us." He bowed. I felt a pang of gratitude. This man no doubt knew me as Cecilia also, his enemy on both sides of the war. But he didn't mention it. "I've heard a lot about what you've accomplished out here, but I wanted to see it for myself." "We both did," I added, gesturing to Soleil. "Should Elenoir ever be habitable again, we'd be neighbors." He nodded seriously. "A relationship that we have already taken our first steps toward. Even now your people wander the wasteland, searching out places to plant new groves. We are all restarting in one way or another." Lyra took a deep breath. The wind blew from the east, carrying a subtle scent of the distant sea. "Come on, I'll show you around." The settlement consisted of perhaps 40 or 50 buildings. The Alacrians had ingeniously formed bricks from the ash, but this had the unfortunate side effect of giving everything a drab appearance. Still, against the backdrop of the vibrant green beast glades, and with large, square raised planting beds sprouting a variety of fruits and vegetables, the settlement had a homely air to it. Two young women made a game of quickly harvesting bushy plants covered in purple berries, shouting as they raced to collect more than the other. A handful of children ran past, pulling kites in the shape of exaggerated mana beasts from the beast glades. Somewhere, a man was singing, and his melody floated through the town as if by magic, easing into the core of my anxiety and starting to break it apart. How many Alacrians remain here in the borderlands? I asked, trying to do some quick math in my head. 428, Lyra answered casually, as if she knew the number by heart. Less than a quarter of our original number. These are the people who wanted the promised new life Ceres had offered them more than they yearned for a return to normalcy in Alacria. Not that those who left received such a life. I expect there are many who now wish they hadn't left, considering. A reverberant lowing from the other side of the village made my heart leap. Moon oxen, Lyra smiled. We've continued to expand our herd. Quite a few end up here. They're incredibly useful, providing milk, fertilizer, and a warning system for when mana beasts get near the settlement. I suppose you already know that, though. Have you tried to make cheese from the milk yet? I asked, fondly remembering the first time my parents had forced me to try it. It's pretty pungent, an acquired taste, I suppose, but very hearty and lasts a long time. An idea occurred to me. You know, Elenoir was still closed off for most of my life, so trade was very limited, but I've had enough dwarven cuisine by now to bet they'd love it. Jaimin snorted. Our first export is a fledgling nation. Ox cheese. Perhaps next time we have elves through, they can get us started with the process. Lyra's tone was serious, and a small line had formed between her brows as she concentrated on her thoughts. We could even offer a few of the moon oxen in exchange. Our first trade deal, I suggested with a little laugh. Lyra gave me a mock frown. Do you have the authority to pen such a deal? I gave a very unladylike snort. As you said, I'm princess of the wasteland. We were passing by a small gray hut, and a wet cough issued from its open doorway. Soleil paused and peered into the shadows. You mentioned a coughing sickness. Jaimin hummed uncomfortably. 7 have fallen ill over the last few days. We suspect it has something to do with the ash. Soleil looked questioningly at Lyra, who nodded. We followed the phoenix woman to the doorway, where she paused and knocked lightly against the wooden frame that supported the ash bricks. Hello, my name is Soleil of Clan Asclepius. I'm a healer. A tired voice invited Soleil in. Lyra and I followed, while Jaimin waited outside. It was dim inside the building. The sun was at the wrong angle to light the interior through the small windows, blocked by a taller building next door, and all the candles had gone out. I had seen lighting artifacts in other buildings, but it wasn't surprising that there weren't enough modern amenities for every house. Besides being dim, the interior was also sparsely furnished. A bed, little more than a cot, was pressed up against one wall, while half the small building was occupied by shelving and a table and chairs. A simple fireplace was built into the back wall, and a cooking pot hung above the dark, cold remains of a fire. A woman in her middle years rested in the bed, covered by a patchwork fur blanket. How are you feeling, Allium? Lyra said, approaching the bed and kneeling down on the rush-covered floor. The woman coughed before answering. My body aches from the coughing, Lady Lyra. She paused for a fit of coughing, can't seem to shake it. I noticed that, with each cough, the woman's weak mana signature seemed to spasm. Lyra's eyes flicked toward the woman's core, then back to her face, telling me she'd noticed as well. Never did really feel like myself again, after that wave smacked us when Agrona was defeated. The woman paused to cough every few words. Weakened me, I think. Soleil hummed, her nostrils flaring. Her bright eyes were darting everywhere around the sick woman's body, as if she could see not only through the blanket but right through the woman herself. Have you been eating mana beast flesh? We all have, Lyra answered, a touch defensively. We grow as much food as we can, but wildlife is rare aside from the mana beasts that spawn in the beast glades. Peace, Soleil said with a smile that seemed to warm the room. This is not an affliction of the lungs caused by ash exposure. She turned her attention back to her patient. You have picked up a parasite from consuming the flesh of a mana beast infected by some lesser form of a demon leech. Fatal if untreated, but the infection itself can be burned away harmlessly. The sick woman's cheeks, already sallow, paled even further. Do I have your permission to do so? Vritra's horns, yes, the sick woman gasped, almost choking as she struggled to hold back another cough. Soleil drew aside the blanket, then bent over the bed, her hands extended. Warm light began to issue from her hands, and the room filled with mana. Fiery sparks danced over the sick woman's exposed skin for several seconds before sinking into her flesh. She began to sweat and writhe. A weak cough burst from her, and red specks stained her lips. Lyra took the woman's clammy hand, holding it tight. I tried to follow Soleil's magic as it coursed through the coughing Alacrian. Like a thin veil of flame burning away the unwanted vegetation from a farmer's field, Soleil's mana scoured the woman's body. Something stirred inside my mind, a dim flash of insight, some learned but forgotten knowledge. It had been Cecilia who'd absorbed the last of Lady Dawn's mana, not me. It was the legacy who understood it. I'd only been a passenger, watching a more powerful mage manipulate mana in a way I couldn't hope to comprehend. And yet, at the same time, my mind had been linked with hers, connected for every new spark of enlightenment. Seeing Soleil working her magic drew that insight just a bit closer to the surface. The sick woman gasped, clutching her chest with her free hand. Mana condensed over her skin, roiling like storm-tossed waves back and forth as she instinctively conjured a weak shield. Easy, now, Lyra muttered. The burning phoenix fire attribute mana suddenly subsided, and Soleil straightened. She was beaming down at her patient. And there you are, all gone. Are really? The woman asked. A weak cough followed her words. Soleil patted the woman's head comfortingly. Yup, your body can heal now, and then your mana levels should even right out. Just take it easy for a couple of days, okay? Thank you. After several rounds of thankful praise, we stepped back out into the sunshine. Instead of looking pleased, however, Soleil was frowning. You said there are others? She asked Jaimin. He blinked, and his hardened expression noticeably softened. A few in total, yes. Take me to them. Big, sparkling silver eyes goggled at me as I scratched beneath the Moonox's chin. Take good care of the people here, I said. It didn't answer, but its long tongue snaked out and raked across my wrist scratchily. With one more scuff of the curly hair of its forehead, I left the pad again. Beelined across the nameless village for Soleil's mana signature. She had spent the rest of the previous day assisting those infected by the demon leech poisoning, then we had been treated to a relative feast, demon leech free, I was assured, around a bonfire with nearly the entire village in attendance. I'd then spent the morning livening up some of their planting soil with a little bit of deviant plant attribute mana arts. My visit to the Alacrian border village had given me a lot to think about. They'd created a simple but functional life for themselves out here. It was difficult, with many dangers, as the demon leech poisoning had made immediately clear, and a clear downgrade from the comforts most had enjoyed back in Alacria, but it was honest and, perhaps most of all, free. If they could rebuild for themselves, I was certain the elves could, too. I found Lyra and a few of the Alacrians I'd met over the last day standing around Soleil. The phoenix was bathing them in her bright smile as she gently shook hand after hand. Please, can't you stay a bit longer? Offer as your blessing, Great Phoenix. Come with you, as your steward or assistant. I'll do anything, do without you if we're wounded or poisoned again. Soleil laughed, a sound like rustling wings. You were strong before I came, and you will remain such after I leave. There is much of this continent for me to see, but you will always be special as the first of your kind to welcome the Asclepius clan back into the world. Lyra, seeing my approach, peeled away from the group. As much as I'm loath to see you both leave, I think you should probably get the Asura out of here before people start worshipping her. The hole left by the Vritra is hard to fill. I smiled, but the expression cracked, becoming something halfway to a frown. Living like this will teach them self-reliance, I have no doubt. I swallowed a lump in my throat. I'm glad to have really met you, Lyra dried. Her mouth fell open and she regarded me in wordless surprise. I plowed on, only half knowing what I was trying to say. You've helped me find closure into a part of my life I didn't even realize was a gaping wound. So much happened so quickly after my parents' deaths, and I had no control over anything for so long. And then Agrona was gone and the war was over and I still have all this emotion seething inside of me, that. As words failed me, I shrugged helplessly. I'm just glad, that's all. Lyra stepped forward, her arms opening as if she were about to hug me. I froze, and she stopped, easing back and bending smoothly into a deep bow instead. She held the bow for far longer than necessary before straightening. A lock of flame-orange hair fell across her face, which she swept aside with a practiced gesture. Farewell, Tessia Aerolith. Soleil waved her final goodbyes to the gathered Alacrians, and we lifted up into the air and turned north, shooting out over the grey wasteland. Avier, who had roosted silently over the last day, took wing from a nearby rooftop and fell in behind us. Thank you for humoring me, I said, projecting my voice with mana to help myself be heard. Soleil spun onto her back, flying with the ease of one floating on still water. I am here to experience whatever you have to show me. I'm the eyes, ears, and voice for Clan Asclepius in Decaden now, so wherever you want to lead me, I'll follow. I chuckled into the wind. Our flight picked up speed as I grew more comfortable, studying how Soleil did it but also just relaxing. It was mesmerizing, speeding across the rippling gray emptiness. The devastation of Elenoir was so complete that few features of the land even remained. Rivers had been wiped away, hills flattened, canyons collapsed. Rarely, we would see the remains of a few trees, or rocks protruding up through the ash. Otherwise, it was just endless gray. That and the lack of atmospheric mana made finding the first grove fairly easy. We flew for an hour, maybe two, before I sensed it in the distance. I was certain Soleil and Avier had felt it much sooner. I stopped once we were close enough to have drawn the attention of the handful of elves working there. They'd planted 7 trees. None were taller than perhaps 8 feet, all of them spindly. The ground around the grove had been cleared of ash and tilled with fresh soil brought from beyond Elenoir, mixed with just a pinch of the Ephiodan soil. Green in the gray. It was a childish thought, but it was all I could focus on. That little splash of green. Life fighting its way back from the absoluteness of death. It's beautiful. 503. Alaric Mayer. The contents of the small leather pouch gave a crystalline clink as I set it down on the bar. The wrinkled little bartender scooped the payment away in a swift, silent movement, making it disappear behind the counter. Her beady eyes squinted and her lips pursed, deepening the craggy wrinkles of her face. She drummed her fingers across the bar once, then pointed out the nearest window. A long-legged equine mana beast was connected to a ramshackle carriage outside. A man in a long coat and wide-brimmed cap lingered next to the cart, eyeing anyone who walked by appraising Ly. I knocked twice on the scored and pocked bar top, winked at the tender, and then headed for the door. The commander leaned against the wall beside the door, leaving without even a glance at the bottles behind the bar. She clicked her tongue, and I caught the ghost of a smile beneath her hood. You really have turned over a new leaf. It was moments like those that reminded me most clearly of one certainty. As lucid as the hallucination was, it was only ever a reflection of my own internalized thoughts. Commander Cynthia Goodsky, a name she took after turning away from the Vritra, would never have been so graceless as to kick an old dog while he was shivering from withdrawals. That was a special kind of self-deprecating cruelty that only I could come up with. I shoved my way through the creaking door out into the street. It was overcast and had recently stopped raining. Although Oneka was a prosperous trading city on the coast of Truasia, I was in the unlit edge of town. The street wasn't even paved, and my boots sank an inch into the muck as I crossed it. The coachman saw me coming immediately. Straightening, he flicked the brim of his hat back and hooked his thumbs in his belt. He had a scruffy, patchwork red growth of something almost like a beard. His face was pockmarked from sun scars, but there was an unhidden cleverness in his dark eyes. Need a lift, stranger? You look like a gent with a purpose. He grinned, revealing multiple rotten teeth. I got close enough that when I spoke softly, he'd still hear me clearly. Right on both counts. You're clearly a clever man. I paused, letting him digest the bent of my words. Clever enough to catch the eye of someone wanting to go into hiding. Clever enough to turn another man's desperation into a bit of hard-earned wealth for yourself. I admired the belt he was wearing. Acid green and gleaming, at odds with the rest of his drab, damp attire. A functioning relic, pretty rare, that, exceedingly rare, I'd say, since they're all taken to Tegrim Kylum and very few ever make it out again. His eyes widened. Well now, friend, don't see why you'd think, just a backwater coachman, ain't I? Couldn't afford something like. A dagger flashed in my hand, and I stepped forward and plunged it into his ribs. Or I would have, if not for a burst of mana that wrapped him in a shield of glowing blue energy. It was fast, flickering in and out in a blink. The mana beast harnessed to his cart let out a nervous crooning noise and shuffled back and forth. What are you? I stowed the blade with one hand and held the other up to silence him. That's the kind of thing might have been stolen from Tegrim Kylum. Say, by someone who worked there before everything went sideways. Maybe given to you in trade for passage and sealed lips. Still, the belt's worth 1,000 times whatever service you could have possibly provided. A lot of wealthy high-bloods would kill for such a thing. The coachman glanced around nervously as he closed his coat, hiding the artifact. What do you want, chum? A ride. I gave the man a knowing smirk, and his face fell. If his secret benefactor had been someone powerful, maybe things would have played out different. But this was the kind of man that could smell desperation from 100 feet. He knew the runaway and Stiller was less of a threat than me, and so he didn't argue. I took my place in the carriage. The door didn't close properly and creaked dangerously when I forced it shut. The carriage had an open window out to the driver's seat. It looked like, once upon a time, there had been slats that could be closed to keep out the wind and weather, but these had long since been broken. The coachman hopped up into his seat and took up the reins. He shot a furtive glance back at me, then gave a gentle tug at the mana beast and a click of his tongue. The axle groaned as the cart began to move. "I didn't get your name, friend," I said as the cart squished through the mud. "I ain't nobody," I chuckled. "Nobody's nobody in my line of work." After confirming our destination with the driver, I settled in for a long ride north up the coast. I could have used a Tempest warp, but pinpointing a destination without a specific target or a clear picture of where I was headed seemed like a mistake. Far easier if this coachman could drop me off right where my prey landed as well. Besides, it was a welcome reprieve from the chaos. In part, that's why I was out here myself, tracking the instiller across the ass end of Truasia. Anything to not be part of one more answerless meeting. The pulse of mana that killed Scythe Dragoth had reached past the borders of Central Dominion, drawing the mana out of every mage it hit. The backlash hit the strongest the hardest, ironically. But plenty of others, those who were frail by nature or still weak from the shockwaves that had rippled across the world only weeks earlier, died too. Although she played it off, Saris seemed pretty close to the edge herself right after it happened. The 1-2 punch of the shockwave from Decathan, followed by this mana-draining pulse that seemed to originate from the Basilisk Fang Mountains, maybe even Tegrin Kylum itself, had everyone spooked. Not that there wasn't reason for it. Tens of thousands of mages all got the mana sucked out of them at the same time. Well, it didn't seem like a sign of particularly good times to come. As the carriage rumbled along, I didn't dare close my eyes. At least one stayed firmly on my driver at all times, but I let my tired mind crunch back through the last few days since Central Academy. My bruises felt sharp and fresh as I remembered the wild escape, dead Scythe, and the recording artifact. I hadn't been surprised to find Cara Denoir on her feet despite the fact most mages were barely walking. The girl was tenacious. She'd been organizing a bunch of unadorned to bring in whatever comforts they could for those most impacted by the mana pulse. None of Highblood Koenig's men even bothered to ask who I was as I approached the library, and I was able to watch from the mouth of an alley for several minutes. When I say anyone who can activate a Tempest warp, I mean anyone. Cara was scolding a grumpy-looking man in Koenig colors. He had no mana signature, so I assumed he was an unadorned servant. From the quality of his clothes and the pouty scowl on his face, he was clearly high-ranking among their staff and not used to being ordered around by anyone besides the Koenigs. "We have a lot of people here who will be better off in their own homes and puking and crying on the library floor following whatever that siphoning blast was." She took a deep breath to calm herself. "Everyone here is hurting, but anyone who can still stand and channel mana is needed. Send a call out into the city if necessary." I didn't hear the man's response as he bowed and marched quickly away. I'd slipped from my hiding spot and approached Cara as she took a scroll from another unadorned and began reading it. "Well, isn't this a tidy little Custer F. Who, Alaric?" Several expressions tumbled across her features in quick succession: relief, guilt, and hope, among others. "I was hoping we'd catch up with your group before. But now," her voice softened, the scroll hanging limp in her grasp. "We could use some help, if you've got any to offer." I made a point of glancing around the scene outside Cargiden's central library. Every single mage present had the same green around the gills look. In fact, it was the only way to tell the mages from the unadorned. Almost no one had a solid mana signature. "Lady Saris?" I asked when I didn't see her. Cara bit inside of her cheek and shot a furtive glance to a nearby tent. It had been erected in a hurry in the grassy lawn beside the library. More were already going up around it. "Alive," Cara nodded. "Come on." She led me into the tent, which was guarded by two young mages with weak mana signatures. I gauged them both to be no more than crest bearers. The pulse, through the act of drawing out all a mage's mana from their core, had impacted the stronger mages more than the weaker ones. Inside, the tent held nothing but a single fold-out cot. Saris, once Scythe of Sesklar, was sitting up in the cot, her back supported by several rolled blankets. Dark rings surrounded her eyes, and her cheeks were porcelain pale. Her retainer, Silrit, sat on the ground beside the tent, his head reclined against the thick fabric wall, eyes shut. Both gave off weak, shuddering auras. I would have been surprised to find them in such good condition, considering Dragoth, but a handful of empty vials in the grass beside the cot explained it, elixirs and potent ones by the residue remaining. Saris's eyes flickered open as we entered. I gave her an appraising look. "You look a far sight better than your contemporary, Dragoth." Dead as a doornail. Saris's eyes closed as if dragged down by a heavy weight. A pitiful end for a pitiful man. Her eyes opened again, and she gave me a sharp look. What were you doing anywhere near Dragoth? I chuckled and withdrew the shard of carved crystal, the storage crystal from a recording artifact. The people need proof that Agrona's really gone. If my intelligence is correct, this crystal contains just such proof. Some good news today, Kara said under her breath. But how did you get this? Saris leaned forward, staring into the crystalline structure as if she could read its contents through sheer will alone. It's from a mobile recording artifact. Her brows rose slightly. From TBATE, but the images will be mana-locked. They require a specific sequence of applied mana, sometimes even from only certain people, to access. I felt my expression sour. You were a bloody scythe. Are you saying that you can't use this? Saris was silent, a moment, and her disapproval hung heavy in the air despite her backlash. I might be able to break the lock, once I've had time to recover. I picked dried blood out of my beard and flicked it into the grass. Speaking of, I don't suppose you have any idea what in the abyss that was, do you? Saris sighed and eased back again, closing her eyes. Several theories, but they'd likely do more harm than good if I shared them now. She waved a hand as if clearing away cobwebs. I need time to think. We should let Saris rest, Kara said, putting a hand on my arm, about to lead me out. There's something else, I said, taking half a step closer to the cot. Everyone who's seen this recording is dead, except for Wolfram of Highblood Redwater. Him, and a single instiller who managed to slip out of Dragoth's clutches before he merced the others. Saris shifted slightly in the cot, but she didn't open her eyes. He may be useful if we can't unlock this recording ourselves. Can you put someone on it? I shrugged, then realized she couldn't see me. I've spent the last day imprisoned and tortured. Not sure what kind of mess this pulse thing has done to my people, yet. I'll go myself. Kara pushed out a sharp breath through her nose. You just said you. Never mind that. They were amateurs. Behind Kara, in the doorway to the tent, the hallucination of Commander Cynthia smirked. Saris coughed. Her eyes were moving rapidly beneath the lids. I couldn't explain it, but a shiver ran up my spine. Even in this shape, her mind was churning. This pulse of mana, as you called it, has come at exactly the wrong time, she said, speaking slowly and clearly. We need a positive message to counter the people's despair. Like showing them indisputable evidence that they are no longer under the Vritra's yoke. Understood, I grunted. With a wink to Kara, I showed myself out. My network had been in shambles, as expected. It was the mystery of it, more than the effects themselves, that shook people. A bitter wind from the mountains that stole the mana from your very core. Like the tales of wraiths told to scare children straight, I thought as I watched the Truatian coastline slither past from the carriage window. The sheer scale of it was the real thing. Agrona's ghost, still sucking the life from his people, I muttered. My driver shot a watery-eyed glance back at me, but neither of us spoke. Whether by luck, a lack of skill on the part of my prey, or the fact that word of Dragoth's death spread like soulfire, it had not taken long to hear rumors of a desperate, on-the-run instiller headed north. This, of course, had led me eventually to Oneka and the dreary coachman currently delivering me to my destination. It had taken just enough time for the doubt to set in. So far, we'd gone with the story that this secondary, mana-stealing pulse had been a kind of aftershock to the original shockwave. That, of course, we now knew was caused by Arthur Lewine's defeat of Agrona in TBATE. I didn't understand it, but I didn't need to. This aftershock story was bullshit, of course, but Alakria was already on the edge. I didn't know how much more pressure the nation could take before it tore itself to shreds in a terrified frenzy. Listen to you, worrying about the nation, again, Cynthia said from the seat next to me. She reclined with one leg kicked over the other, absently picking at the sole of her boot. You've rediscovered patriotism, it seems. I scoffed. Been shackled to it by Arthur Lewin, more like. Lying little shit. She laughed, making me chuckle too. She didn't have to tell me that I was lying. She wasn't even there, just a hallucination of a broken mind. Cynthia cocked her head as if reading my thoughts. Her smile softened, becoming sad. She looked out her window. I blinked. She was gone. How much longer? I asked, half shouting at the driver, suddenly antsy to be out of the carriage. It was starting to grow dark, and the lights of a small village could just be seen in the distance. He clicked his tongue at the equine mana beast pulling the carriage, and it slowed to a stop. You've got a good nose on you, mister. He hopped off the front of the carriage and opened the door with a grunt. Feller you're looking for had me let him out right here. He indicated a standing stone that marked a break in the thick tangle of bushes that separated the road from the rocky coastline. No idea where he went from here. I kicked a rock. It skipped twice before vanishing into the bushes. We've come a long way together, friend. Maybe our relationship has had some ups and downs, but I'd like to think we've built some trust over the last few hours. Most people take years to build up to the comfortable silence we've shared. I pushed mana into my runes, letting it emanate out as a threatening intent without casting a spell. It would be a shame to ruin it now. Ah, piss on this, he muttered. I ain't dying for some bloke I don't even know. My cousin has a shack down on the beach, on the other side of town. Nobody, the coachman shrugged his shoulders in defeat. Cousin works on a shipping vessel that runs round the north coast to Dionys, don't he? So he ain't hardly ever home. Told this feller he could stay there for a bit. I considered forcing him to take me right to the front door. His appearance in town might just tip off my quarry, though. Besides, I was pretty sure he was telling the truth. Get out of here. I pressed payment into his hand. Enough that he was unlikely to do anything other than hightail it back to Oneka. And sell off that belt as soon as you can, or someone is likely to gut you for it. The coachman scratched his scruff of beard as he visibly struggled to find words, then grunted, jumped back up into the driver's seat, and clicked his tongue at his mana beast. The creatures carefully dragged the cart in a loop, crushing the brush on the other side of the road, then hurried away. The coachman, pale in the dim light, stared straight ahead. A cool wind blew in off the sea. I pulled my cloak tight around me, lifted my hood, and started toward the village. The main road veered left, while a separate path broke away to the right, leading right through the center of the village. A couple of farmhouses surrounded by small plots of struggling crops marked the outer edge of the village. A farmer, still toiling in the twilight, stopped his work to lean against a rake and watch me pass. The village itself was fairly quiet. At its center, it had a small square defined by a warehouse that stank of fish, an inn with no sign out front, and an out-of-place manor house that I guessed was some kind of town hall, or maybe the residence of whatever struggling named blood controlled the place. Several market stalls lined the square, but they were all closed up. The dull roar of drunken conversation came out of the inn, along with the smell of roasting meat, herbs, spices, and stale beer. I caught sight of two armored men as they rounded a corner down the street past the inn. Not wanting to get caught up answering questions from nervous small-town guardsmen, I ducked into the shadow of the inn and waited. The guards passed by without even glancing in my direction. Careful to avoid sticking my face directly in the window where the light from inside would highlight it for all to see, I glanced into the inn, searching for a man matching the innstiller's description. Many of the locals were out for a drink and a late dinner, probably only having recently returned from a long day's fishing, but none of them had the look of outsiders to the village, and no one matched the description I'd been given. Circling around behind the inn, I made my way through the village until it gave way to a rocky beach. The sound of the sea lapping against the shore was more than enough to cover any noise I made as I followed the stony shore northward. Just as the coachman had said, I found a poorly maintained shack a few minutes outside of town. It backed up to the short cliff that separated the beach from the untamed land behind it. A rickety pier floated 30 feet out into the sea, buoyed so that it could rise and fall with the tide. The shed itself was raised up on pylons, keeping it above the high water mark. The pylons themselves were green with algae and rotten. One had sunk down slightly, giving the entire structure an off-kilter lean. A suppressed mana signature was just barely detectable inside the shack. Although I'd managed to learn a fair bit about this instiller as I tracked him from Carteeden to Ainsgar, then Eitri, and finally Oneka, he'd been careful to avoid letting his name slip even as he raced halfway across the continent. Regardless, his name probably wouldn't help me, it'd only warn him that I knew exactly who he was. I cautiously approached the ramp that led up to the front door, shrouding my own mana signature as best I could while watching for any flicker from his that he'd channeled a rune. Suddenly, the wind was blowing from the wrong direction. I spun southward, gaping, forgetting to be quiet. Forgetting what I was even doing. The familiar, frozen claws ripped their way through me and grasped the mana in my core. I choked, falling backwards. The sea-worn wood of the door frame splintered, and I crashed through the door and landed on my back on a stained rug. I stared senselessly up at a man clutching a burning blade. The short sword slipped from his grasp as both his hands went to his chest. The point thunked into the floorboards an inch from my face, the flames scorching my beard in the instant they persisted before fading away. I was dimly aware of the man reaching out to support himself. His weight overturned a small table, which crashed to the ground. He followed it only a moment later. My eyes squeezed shut against the pain of having all my mana ripped away from me yet again. An agonized grunt escaped from between my clenched teeth. Nearby, the instiller was gasping and weeping, his attempt at forming words failing at either his lips or my ears, I couldn't be certain. Behind my closed eyelids, our mana mingled together with a weak glow as it streamed away from us. Nearby on the floor, the instiller was gasping. Each choked breath was interspersed with a wet cough. Fuck, was all I could muster the strength to utter. But I had to move. I started by rolling onto my side, using my right arm for leverage by stretching it across my chest. The smell of mildew and salt seawater was strong. Once on my side, I opened my eyes. The instiller was only a couple of feet away, eye to eye with me. The short sword stuck up from the floor between us like a warning. His body was shaking, and with each cough, he curled inward, clutching his chest. Blood ran freely from his nose and badly split lip. "I'm a friend," I said, still trying to catch my breath. I completed the roll onto my stomach, then pushed myself to my knees. "I'm here to help you." Now fully in the fetal position, his face distorted in a grimace of pain, he shook his head. With tremulant hands, I tugged the blade free and tossed it aside. The instiller flinched at the clatter of steel on wood. My wits finally returned to me, and I used the tiny portion of mana left in my core to activate my extra-dimensional storage artifact, drawing out 2 small vials full of gently glowing liquid. Elixirs. Flicking the top free from one, I quaffed it in a single swallow. Mana rushed through me, and the clenching pain in my core eased immediately. It was like a cool wind blowing through my muscles, bones, and brain meat. I let out a relieved breath. "Here, one for you too. And I won't even say you owe me one." The man struggled as I lowered the elixir to his lips, but he had no strength to fight me. The elixir filled his mouth, which I then clamped shut with my free hand. His eyes bulged and his nostrils flared desperately as he struggled not to swallow. Nature and physics worked against him, and within moments he'd consumed the mana-restoring liquid. "There, see, not so," I trailed off, watching his reaction to the elixir. Despite the mana swiftly filling his core and spreading out through his body, he wasn't relaxing. Vritra's balls, what? Perhaps finally realizing that I was trying to help him, not kill him, the instiller reached out and grabbed the hem of my cloak. His face was pale and green, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. Chest, can't. I eased the man onto his back, and then felt his head, neck, and chest. Jaw clenched, dripping in a cold sweat, looks like he's about to be sick. The signs were consistent with backlash, but the elixir should have relieved them immediately. I'd seen men push themselves harder than their heart could handle more than once, and they'd all died just like this. My focus switched. This was no longer a mission to find and bring back a potentially hostile resource. The recorded images. The ones of Agrona, from Decathan. The man looked confused, his watery eyes drifting around the dim shack. I pressed down on his chest, and they snapped back to me. "You saw the recording. You know how to access it." A flicker. He knew. "We don't have much time. Tell me how to bypass the mana lock, and then I'll get you to the village. Surely they have a healer who can help you." Catching myself, I quickly added, "Dragoth's dead. Agrona's captured, you saw it yourself. You're a free man after this. I just need your help." "And not. Can't," he choked on his own tongue and coughed blood across my sleeve. "We can prove to the entire continent that Agrona's gone," I said, inflecting my tone so it sounded like a plea. "You hold the key to an entirely new era for Alakria." A spasm of pain shook the instiller, and he looked away. "Is it loyalty, then?" I didn't try to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "Still desperately hanging from your god king's short hairs, willing to do whatever it takes to maintain your stake in his broken world?" "No." The instiller grimaced, then affixed me with a bloodthirsty stare. He tried to keep talking, but something was wrong with his jaw and tongue. He just couldn't form the words. But the look in his eyes spoke volumes. I took his hand in both my own and squeezed. "I don't know what you're trying to tell me. Help me unlock the recording. Give me a chance to figure this out." The instiller jerked his hand free. Turning his head, he spit a mouthful of blood on the floor. He shook badly as he tried to write in the blood, but his hand was no more under his control than his mouth. After several seconds of failure, during which he accomplished nothing but smearing blood into the rough grain of the wood, he let his head fall back to the floor. Another spasm took him. He wasn't going to last long. Suddenly he raised both hands above himself. Mana began to leak from him in a series of pulses. Maybe it was the fatigue and backlash, but I didn't immediately understand. He opened his eyes, glared at me, then repeated the sequence. Understanding hit me like a brick to the back of the head. The mana lock opens to a specific sequence. Show me again. His arms were trembling wildly now. The mana fluctuated more than it had the first time, but now that I realized what I was seeing, I followed along easily and committed it to memory. Thank you, friend. You're damned brave. Help, he said, his arms falling, his fingers kneading into his chest and neck. I withdrew another vial from my dimension ring. This one was larger, sealed with a waxed cork. The liquid inside was clear. I peeled the wax and uncorked the vial carefully, not wanting to get any on myself. Here, this will ease the pain. Then I'll take you to the village. His senses robbed by the pain and fear, he opened his mouth and swallowed the poison without questioning. Even with my Tempest warp, I knew I couldn't get him to a healer in time. The best I could do was offer him a quick end to his suffering. He let out a relieved breath as his systems shut down. The poor bastard even smiled, his lips starting to move in thanks. He was dead before he could form the words. My mind focused on the key to the mana lock, repeating it over and over again to seal it away in my memory. Even as I lifted the surprisingly light corpse and carried him out of the shack, I thought only of what the recording would represent to the people of Alakria. Proof. I left the corpse at the edge of the village where the guards would find him soon, making it look like he'd traveled there under his own power. They'd assume he died from the mana pulse, which was true enough. Probably give him a burial at sea, which was better than rotting in that shed for a week or two before the owner came home. Then, finding a dark alley where I wouldn't be observed, I retrieved my Tempest warp and prepared to return to Cargeddon, where Saris and Kara awaited news. 504. Arthur Leywin. There, get it. One of the young phoenixes let out an animalistic crow as he sent a fiery shape like a bird of prey scorching through the trees. A large mana beast with a green and brown mottled hide bolted from where it had been concealed within the undergrowth. The phoenix's spell curved in the air, flew in between the beast's 6 powerful, churning legs, and burned straight through its muscular chest. The mana beast bellowed as it crashed to the ground, but the sound was short-lived. After a single twitching jerk of its powerful limbs, it went still. The creature had a long face with large eyes on either side of its head beneath the antlers, each of which had 20 or 30 prongs that spread out in a wide antenna from its skull. Riven Cawthon and one of the other basilisks hurried to the corpse alongside the phoenix who'd struck the blow. A clean kill, Riven announced, gripping a prong of the beast's huge branching antlers and twisting its head around so I could see it more clearly, revealing a third eye staring blindly from the middle of its head. A beautiful Autul. Well struck, Orin. The phoenix who'd killed the elk-like mana beast grinned. It'll feed us all this evening. Maybe I'll prepare its hide and offer it to your sister as a courting gift, he suddenly grunted as Riven struck him on the arm, making everyone laugh. Riven looked around for his sister, who had come as one of the 4 basilisks representing Clan Cawthon, but she was elsewhere on the mountainside. You're lucky Romy didn't hear that. You'd be wed before we return to Featherwalk Airy. Unlikely, the other basilisk said, still laughing. Until Arthur claims one of these women as his wife, none of them will spare a glance for any other man. Regis gave a bark of laughter as he and Boo searched the forested mountainside dell for any other signs of movement. He's always had a way with princesses. Don't take it personally. Beside me, Ellie's lips pressed into a thin line as she struggled not to laugh along with the others. I gave her a gentle push, and she snorted and swatted my hand away. So, that beast was not our prey? Chul asked, frowning as he watched the phoenix and basilisk work together to begin dressing their kill. The rest of us continued on up the slope. We'll know it when we see it, apparently, I answered. My senses were extended outward beyond the limits of my physical body, feeling for every disturbance in either ether or mana. Chul's brow furrowed in concentration as we walked. Sylvie was with the other dragons, about half a mile back. Viria, representative of the Inthara clan, walked with us instead. She stayed at Ellie's side, keeping up a constant litany of advice and instruction. Most of the phoenixes and basilisks were nearby, but Zelena had taken the leviathans up a separate path through the dell. Ahead of us, the mountain seemed to keep climbing endlessly. I forgot to ask, but did you and I leaned in close, speaking so only Chul could hear me. Did you and Mordain hash things out? Chul grunted, looking at me in confusion. What does this mean? To hash things out? I felt myself frown. I just meant, did you clear the air? Get on the same page? I hesitated, realizing I wasn't helping. Come to an understanding. Chul made an face faces he finally understood. He faced the woman who wore your lady love's form to save me. He needed me home to get the full measure of you. He sent me away because he trusted me and knew it was what I needed. He explained this as I healed, and I felt foolish for doubting his motivations. I blinked at him, still stuck on the lady love part of what he'd said. Slowly, my mind caught up with the rest. I cleared my throat awkwardly. Well, that's good. Ahead of us, there was a cracking like breaking wood, and the ground gave way beneath one of the phoenixes. Nisha shouted, and the ground seethed. 5 trees closed in like the fingers of a giant fist. Phoenix flames and soulfire leapt into the boughs of the trees, bright orange shot through with black. I flashed forward, pressing out in every direction with a bubble of ether to push back the curling trees. Nisha jumped into a black pit in the ground, grasping a writhing root at the hole's lip to keep herself from plummeting into the bottomless dark. Flames flashed within the hole, then the fallen phoenix reappeared, arcing through the air as if tossed. Nisha reappeared just behind him, flipping out of the hole to land on her feet. I shoved outward, expanding the etheric barrier. The trees shattered with a noise like cannon fire, bone-white kindling exploding in every direction. Wood whites, Riven mused, looking down into the pit as Nisha bent down to check on her companion. My own gaze followed Riven's. The pit was no longer black, and no deeper than 10 feet to the soil and root-covered bottom. Suck you in and trap you, Riven continued, turning away from the hole. Then slowly digest your mana. Nasty way to go. Ellie gave the pit a wide berth as she caught up. That was crazy. It happened so fast. The mountain has many ways to kill the unwary, Nisha said, standing and pulling the other phoenix to his feet. He ran dirty fingers through his bright orange hair, chagrined. Sorry nays. Should have noticed, he mumbled. Novus's daughter rolled her citrine eyes. At least you didn't forget not to fly. We continued on, eventually catching up to Zelena where her leviathans had brought down an enormous titan bear. The serious leviathans, a trait more related to their proximity to Zelena and not necessarily their race in general, were in good cheer following what they said was a battle worthy of many campfire tales to come. When we reached the point where the forested dell gave way to rocky slopes pocked with snow, Nisha called an early afternoon halt. Cook fires were lit, and meat from the Ephiotan beasts that we'd hunted throughout the day was prepared and spitted. Soon, the entire mountainside was rich with the scent of fire-charred meat. I found a mossy rock in the sun and took a seat, enjoying the sounds and smells as the Azores cooked. It is a pleasant reprieve, Sylvie said, arriving to sit next to me and share my thoughts. I can see why these rituals have survived the test of time. They are a necessary outlet, Zelena said as she approached from the direction of the other leviathans. She had a scratch on her neck that looked almost healed. In both hands, she carried a wooden tray laid out with fresh cuts of salted meat. No, it is not the Titan bear, she said with a smirk, catching my look. She laid down the tray between Sylvie and me, then took a seat herself on the other side. Without a way to challenge ourselves, the Asura would wither. Or worse, go to war with each other. Ellie bounded up and flopped into a thick patch of grass at our feet with a jaw-cracking yawn. Ah, I'm still exhausted from that climb. Am I the only one who feels like they can't breathe up here? I don't know how things like that work in Ephiotus, but in our world, the higher you climb, the thinner the air gets. I took a deep breath and considered. I don't feel it yet, but you're not normal, Ellie said, rolling her eyes. She rested her hands behind her head and kicked her heels against the soil. Although, I guess if I'm the only normal person here, then that makes me the weirdo. Sorry to break it to you, Elle, but you've always been the weirdo, I teased. The oxygen does grow thinner here, but so does the mana. Zelena scanned the forest as if watching the motes of elemental manic flow around us. The ether replaces it. We Asura feel this like a tightness in our chest. So, we're back to Arthur being the weirdo, my sister said after a moment's thought. Good. Nearby, Boo was chomping on the leftovers of a mana beast carcass, which he'd been gifted from one of the Asura. He looked up from where he gnawed his lunch a healthy distance from the rest of us. There was a pause, and then the great bear-like guardian beast let out an almost human-sounding guffaw. Thanks, Boo, Ellie said, smiling at her bond. I knew you'd have my back. Boo snorted and stuffed his face back into the carcass. Regis appeared from the undergrowth, turned in a circle, and then plopped down next to Ellie, resting his chin on her shoulder. I hope Mama Lewine's okay with all those Asoras. It feels kind of weird that we just left her down there with no protection. She's as safe with the Avignas clan as anywhere else, I said. More safe than with us, definitely. Ellie sucked her teeth thoughtfully. I bet she's lounging in the hot springs drinking some spicy phoenix brew. I swear, everything they make smells like cinnamon. A cacophonous braying drowned out the end of Ellie's statement. We all froze, each of us staring in a different direction. The sound had seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if 1,000 ghostly hounds suddenly filled the mountain woods. Our prey, Charles shouted, bounding toward us from the direction of the phoenix's cooking fire. I knew he was right. I didn't know how, exactly, but every instinct in my body burned with the certainty of the hunt. The braying came again, louder and more condensed. All our heads turned simultaneously in the direction of the noise. Go, I barked as I jumped up and bolted out of the clearing. Chull, Sylvie, Ellie, and Regis were right behind me. The hunt is on, Ribbon shouted from somewhere behind me. In an instant, the mountainside was alive with the sound of excited calls and bodies crashing through the undergrowth. The thundering howls shifted to the right, leading us back down the mountainside. King's Gambit and Realmheart glowed with golden light as I empowered them both. Time seemed to slow as the overlapping layers of my consciousness searched for any and every sign of our quarry. The mountain dell was alive with noise and mana. Threads of Asuran spells crisscrossed through the air ahead of me as each of our 20-strong hunting party sought our prey. Among these spells, I felt Ellie channeling her beastwool, her connection with Boob right between them. The source of the braying focused as King's Gambit helped me push through the echoes and noise-swallowing effect of the forest. It sounded as if all that noise came from a single point. Without slowing, I scanned the undergrowth for any sign of movement. The howls were so loud that it was difficult to tell exactly how far away their source was, but I knew it had to be within the range of my sight. Movement in my periphery drew my gaze briefly to the right. Zelena was sprinting parallel to me, a short sword held in each hand. Her storm blue eyes met mine for an instant, and one corner of her lips turned up. She planted her left foot on the stump of a fallen tree, sprang into the air, pushed off a different tree with her right foot, and flung the sword in her right hand. It cut the air with enough force to leave a visible ripple in its wake. Through a gap in the undergrowth, I saw a flash of white. The sword was going to strike. But the next instant, the sword impacted the ground with a dull whump, sending up a shower of soil. The braying was suddenly off to our left and moving away at impressive speed. As our hunting party turned to pursue, Nisha and Viria ended up in front. Boo and Ellie were flagging behind, so Sylvie slowed to stay with them. Chull's heavy footfalls shook the ground with each step as he sprinted beside me, smashing through the thick undergrowth and the occasional fallen tree like a rampaging spiked aurochs. More spells and attacks flew, but I never saw more than white flashes in the green and brown. The mountainside blazed orange, and a wall of fire engulfed the slope ahead of us. I slowed, every sense focused on the braying. Just ahead of me, two bushes moved aside. A small white creature sprinted through the gap. It had overly large ears, a pointed face, and a huge, bushy tail. Fur mixed with scales to cover its body, while white feathers grew from wings that were pulled close to its back. Its clawed, webbed feet hardly seemed to touch the ground as it ran. Its sides pulsed in time with the cacophony of howling and braying, which seemed to be issuing not from the beast's mouth, but from inside its body. Time seemed to slow, constricted by Sylvie's Avum ether arts, as Chull's round-headed maul swung down at the tiny creature. The very ground shattered, toppling nearby trees, but the braying was behind us now. Spinning around, I watched as if in slow motion as the creature sped between a startled Ellie's legs. Boo swiped at it, but it was as if the guardian bear was moving in slow motion while the little beast continued to run on unabated. The etheric pathways lit up in my vision, calling out the course I needed to take to meet the little beast. A glowing violet sword was clenched in my fist, but I hesitated to strike. Something felt wrong, and I hesitated. The river of time surged forward again at normal speed. The Asuras, already swinging around, flashed past me at incredible speed, Chull among them. Regis held at my side, quivering in anticipation of the chase. What are we doing here, Chief? I didn't know. I resumed the chase, but without the fervor of a moment ago. Sylvie and Ellie, previously at the rear, were now leading the chase. Although Ellie held Silverlight in one hand, she didn't attempt to use it. Instead, condensed rings of bright white mana were opening up one after another in the creature's path. It zigzagged around them even as it dodged bright arrows of phoenix fire, thrusting black spikes, and the whip-crack strikes of a water whip. Every time a spell seemed about to strike its target, the beast would melt into the undergrowth only to reappear nearby, never once interrupting the ear-splitting chorus of bestial howls. More spells began to bombard the forest ahead of our party as the more of Asuras began to catch up. Our prey bounded from spike to spike as the ground erupted in a field of blood iron. A fiery hawk descended on it, but when the bird vanished in a flash of bright yellow, the fox-like creature was 20 feet away, dipping beneath a spiraling bola conjured of watery chains. Vines and branches wrapped around its legs, but it slipped through at the last second. The sky darkened as Viria conjured down hundreds of bolts of pure mana. Trees toppled, and the ground ruptured under the force of the spell. Our entire party was forced to halt as the spell swept forward like a storm cloud, tearing a path across the dell. And yet, when the spell faded, the braying continued from behind us. Piercing through the cacophony of noise was a thin, high-pitched squeal. Beside me, Ellie gasped, her face distorting in concentration. I've got it. Running up a tree, Nisha held herself aloft on the trunk by gripping it between her feet. She drew her arms as if pulling back the string of a bow. Flames sprang up between her hands in the shape of a bow and arrow. Just as quickly, she released her conjured arrow. Time seemed to slow again as I watched the arrow of fire draw a bright orange line through the intermittent shadows. The little beast was just visible, its leg bound within the halo of Ellie's mana. It flipped and twisted manically, its thin cry just audible beneath the louder roar coming from within it. The arrow struck home, piercing it behind the left shoulder, a perfect shot. I felt a queasy turn of my stomach as I watched the small white shape tumble end over end before falling still. Our hunting party stayed still, listening. Disconcertingly, the noise of 1,000 yipping, barking, and howling beasts didn't cease. Nervous energy built inside of me. Regis, Chul, Ellie, Sylvie and I gathered together. The other Asuras began to move, circling around the braying corpse, but still keeping well back. Ellie looked over and up at me, her eyes wide. I tethered, it, I saw, I answered, not taking my eyes off the body. I squinted, watching the sides carefully. It was almost as if the scale-covered flesh of the beast's side distended suddenly, as if something were pushing out against it. A cry went up from several of the Asuras. Hold your ground, Nisha called. Instead of the fiery bow, she held a spear in both hands, only the spear was broken into 3 separate pieces, with each piece connected by a small length of chain. Yellow flames raced up and down her arms and along the length of the weapon. I don't like the sound of that thing. Even as the words left her, blood spurted from the small corpse as the flesh of its side gave way. Claws ripped out of the beast. Long, scaled limbs followed. In moments, a creature several times the size of the small, fox-like beast was standing over the ruins of its body. The same haunting braying issued from the new creature's distended belly. It twisted and spun like a fox cornered by wolves, but this new creature was no fox. The monstrosity was like nothing I'd seen before. It had a broad, reptilian body with a bulging stomach, around which sprouted a variety of mismatched limbs. Clawed arms, slithering, blade-tipped tentacles, and thin, bare limbs ending in talons supported its weight between 4 outstretched wings, 2 large wings above a smaller pair. Its hide was a grotesque mixture of yellow fur, green and blue scales, and wrinkled pink flesh. A long neck slithered back and forth like a snake, pure white eyes staring out from the elongated, bone-covered head. Its toothy maw snapped and hissed, dripping bright green saliva that sizzled and popped wherever it landed. Chul roared and leapt forward, his maw carving a bright line of fire through the air. Although the size of a moon ox, the creature moved with the speed of a silver panther. As it darted aside, its tentacles lashed out, their bladed tips flicking across Chul's flesh in 6 places all at once. I shot a glance at my sister, she nodded in response, then jumped on Boo. The two fell back as Ellie started to channel her supporting spells. God's step glowed over my spine, and the ether pathways pulled me in. Violet lightning raced along my limbs as I swung a conjured blade toward the base of the monstrosity's neck. It writhed, and I caught one of the smaller wings instead, shearing it from the body. A tentacle whipped toward my leg, and I reversed the direction of my swing, blocking the strike and slicing the tentacle off in the same motion. The forest lit up with blue and yellow, black and white. A dozen different varieties of spells bore down on the newly birthed monstrosity. I deflected a tentacle strike, stepped back as a wing slashed out at me, and burst forward into position to strike again at the neck. Zelena's crossed shorts words got there first. The two blades shot sparks as they slid past each other, closing like shears to sever the long neck from the bloated, deformed body. The monstrosity slumped, its wings twitching feebly as the severed neck coiled in on itself like a dying worm. Sylvie's thoughts confirmed that she and Ellie were fine, and a cursory glance suggested no life-threatening injuries on Chul. So how do we make this thing shut up? Regis thought to me, pacing side to side as he watched the fresh corpse, from which the wild braying continued to issue. I jumped back as the distended side split open and something inside ripped free of this second corpse. Weapons and spellfire crashed against the horror that emerged. This new monstrosity was 3 times the size of the previous, easily as large as a young transformed dragon. 3 heads, each one slightly different, screeched from atop their long necks. Phoenix fire and waves of pure mana rolled over dark scales, hardly seeming to mark the creature. A spike of blood iron struck it in the chest, but the spike shattered against the hide. Zelena's swords, bright with her infused mana, struck one of the 3 necks, scoring a thin line that welled with dark red blood. One of the heads snaked around to face her. The jaws opened, and an amethyst beam of pure ether erupted from it. Again wreathed in etheric lightning, I appeared in front of her. A wall of my ether formed between us and the beam like a shield, and the 2 opposing forces crackled and sparked against one another. The scent of ozone filled the air, then the beam faded. Chul was near the monstrosity's haunches, slamming it again and again with his burning maul, flames leaping through the fissures of the round head with each swing. Shackles of mana snapped up from the ground to bind the many mismatched limbs in each of the 3 long necks. With a single beat of its wings, our foe shattered my sister's spell, and its grotesque form was lifted off the ground. Concentrating my ether, I stepped straight upward. The ether blade sliced through the tough scales at the base of its throat but didn't sever the neck. As my momentum shifted and I began to fall again, I took the blade in both hands, pushing ether into it to make the blade grow both longer and thicker. The neck twisted, bringing a hideous, skull-like head around to face me. The amethyst light of ether radiated from its maw. Swinging down with all my strength, my blow landed along the line of Zelena's earlier cut. My blade caught for a moment, then slid through scales, flesh, and bone. The head fell free, slithering in the air as it plummeted. The middle head whipped around, and a gout of superheated water burst like a geyser into my face. The attack scoured away my protective ether and the flesh beneath it even as I stepped away. Appearing back on the ground, I had to wait a moment for my sight to correct itself as my eyes and lids healed. King's Gambit moved the branch of my consciousness that was focused on the pain far to the back of my awareness. Zelena stared at me with horror, and then wonder, as my wounds healed, but I paid them no more mind. Above us, our foe had become the center of a swarm of spells. A net of bright white mana tangled in its wings, a crackling storm sent bolt after bolt of lightning crashing into it, and fingers of fire were prying under the scales and into the eyes, mouth, and nose of the 2 remaining heads. Bolts and bullets of different elements peppered its underbelly, and weapons of pure mana, not held by any physical hand, stabbed and cut at the limbs, necks, and wings. I held back my own attacks. Each time this horrible beast was killed, a stronger version was birthed from its bloated carcass. Even now, the baying of 1,000 ghostly hounds drowned out almost every other sound. Would the cycle simply keep repeating until it was too strong for us to kill? Another thread of thought focused on the monster itself. Its features were an unseemly, almost senseless melding of dragon, phoenix, basilisk, and leviathan. Ether and mana both burned within it. It was no coincidence that it had manifested with an etheric attack. This monstrosity had been birthed specifically for this trial. The prey was a reflection of the hunters. But this thought was trivial in the moment. It didn't help me learn how to kill it. Striking it down without destroying it would only result in another, stronger creature. Regis, to me, sensing my earlier discomfort, Regis had so far held back. Now, he leapt toward me, becoming incorporeal as he did so. His body vanished into mine. Our thoughts intertwined. Let's do this. Above, the monster was thrashing against the continual bombardment. Gouts of superheated water, a fusion of water and fire attribute mana, rained down on the Asaurus from one mouth, while black clouds of soulfire issued from the other. Taking a breath to steady myself, I stepped into the etheric pathways revealed by God's step. Regis and I appeared in the air 20 feet in front of our foe as it bore down on us. Both heads locked in instantly, and the streams of mana boiling from its mouths redirected toward me as Regis flowed into the etheric blade already gripped tightly in my hands. A platform of pure ether hardened behind me. I pressed my feet against it and channeled ether into every muscle, tendon, and joint. Dozens of small explosions of ether projected my body forward in a single, near-instant step. The violet flames of destruction danced along my blade as it carved through the air. Following the burst step, ether sparked in exact timing along my shoulders, back, and arms, driving my strike forward. Blade met beast at the joint between the 2 remaining necks. Only the heightened senses of King's Gambit allowed me to remain aware of my own passage through space as I passed in a blur beneath the flying, three-headed monstrosity. I spun in the air, far beyond the end of the creature's tail. Scarlet blood was raining down from the bulging belly, which had been split open from one end to the other by my strike. Even as I watched, the thunderclap of my passage boomed, sending the red rain spraying in a halo down on the forest. Destruction danced in the wound, devouring the blood as it fell, hollowing out the grotesque beast. Its wings were flailing wildly as destruction's flames ate holes through them, and before the arc of my burst step began to turn back down toward the ground, the beast we'd come to hunt was crashing to the ground. I caught myself on a treetop and sprang back toward the violet bonfire that was the monstrosity's body. "Stay well back," I urged, waving at the Asaurus. My own sister and Bond had already moved away, both aware of what destruction could do. For the others, though, this was their first time seeing such a thing. Their awe and fear was obvious in their tight jaws and pale fails. A head appeared from the burning, open belly, writhing back and forth on its undulating neck, its jaws wide in a silent cry. Destruction danced along the black scales and smoldered in its hateful black eyes. It was already burning, as had been my goal. Destruction would feed and feed until nothing was left. A second head followed, and a third, then a fourth. Each one was almost identical, like a dragon whose jaw split the face in the wrong direction, vertically rather than horizontally. Destruction wreathed talons dug at the ground, desperately trying to pull the rest of the now enormous bulk free. Too late, I saw the difference between burning and being aflame. The four vertical jaws unhinged, and waves of purple fire spilled out. Ribbon slammed into his sister, carrying them both out of the way. Sylvie, Ellie, and Viria together wrapped themselves and three others in a silver shield that quaked under the onslaught. Nisha burst into orange fire like a candle, and great wings pulled her backwards, away from the conflagration. The ground ran like water beneath Zelena's feet, and she disappeared into it as the underbrush around her turned to ash, and then to nothing at all. I gaped as the monstrosity finished pulling itself free. Beneath it, destruction unmade the rest of its predecessor. But the destruction did not feed on it. And still, the hounds bayed. 505. For a moment, the mountainside dell seemed frozen, time unmoving. The focus of our hunt loomed above me, now truly colossal in size. Four craning necks extended upward 60 feet or more from a bulbous, distended body. 6 trunk-like limbs supported the creature's bulk, each one ending in a webbed, clawed foot. A pair of fleshy, avian claws reached forward from its chest, wicked talons 2 feet long clenching and unclenching at their ends. Uncountable tentacles sprouted in place of a tail, each one tipped with a blade, bone bulb, hook, or claw, writhing and snapping around the huge body. Atop each long neck was a head like that of a transformed dragon, long and reptilian, each one almost identical to the others. Their horrible jaws ran vertically between their eyes, splitting the heads down the middle. And burning between long, jagged teeth, the violet flames of destruction danced in their gaping maws. The scene surged back into motion, and the endless yipping, barking, and howling of 1,000 beasts sounded through the wooded dell again. A spear of bright white mana tinged with purple ether lanced through the air and struck the monstrosity square in the chest, or at least it should have. The flames of destruction jumped, clawing in the mana and burning it away. The spear didn't so much as touch the black scales. "Keep your distance," Ribbon was shouting. He'd drawn the other 3 basilisks to himself, and they were working together to form a gusting barrier of black wind that danced in dark shapes. The one-armed basilisk conjured a swirling storm of void wind and blood iron, but his spell burned away to nothing wherever destruction touched it. The monstrosity's huge wings beat, stirring up a hurricane that toppled trees and flung the members of our hunting party backwards. I tracked Ellie with one thread of my consciousness. She was safe on Boo's back behind a conjured barrier supported by both Viria and Sylvie. Separate threads tracked the movement and spells of the others. I withheld my own attacks. The destruction-infused ether blade was clenched tightly in my fist, but using it against the monster's previous incarnation had only made our situation worse. The violet flames around my sword exploded outward into the shadow wolf form of my companion. He shook his head, growling deep in his chest, then bolted away. The destruction godrune emanated a powerful radiance from within him, and as he ran he began to transform. His torso broadened and swelled, his fur hardened into spikes down his back, and his burning mane became jagged saw blades of purple fire. Each beat of the monster's wings splashed destruction across the dell. Violet fire ate rocks, trees, and the very ground. Regis dove into the path of a surging torrent, and a matching jet of violet flames spilled from his jaws. Destruction devoured destruction. An involuntary shudder ran down my spine. We need to end this battle quickly. The hunting party was on the move. They fell back in groups, each race coming together to protect and support their clan mates. For a moment, everyone focused on collecting themselves and avoiding the beast's attacks. Gone were the excited shouts and jeers, the crowing, the battle cries. Every Asuran face was set in concentration. This was no longer a hunt, but a fight for survival. The four-headed monstrosity had risen 30 feet up in the air. It whirled about and crashed back to the ground among the dragons, its claws slashing and teeth snapping. Conjured shields broke under the beast's strength. Asura hurled themselves away at blinding speeds. 30-foot claws of fire raked through the air, tearing through the wreath of violet fire and scoring thin scratches down the monstrosity's side. The spell barely left a scratch through destruction's flames. Regis slammed into the beast from above, his jaws closing around the base of one neck. The nightmarish baying of the horde contained in the monstrosity's belly intensified, and the fire of its destruction expanded. All over its body, fissures appeared between the scales and fleshy patches of fur. Its body is barely able to control the destruction. It's eating itself alive. Even as two heads spun around to attack Regis, two others struck like snakes toward the Asuras with a speed incongruent with its size. It spun and bit out at Nisia and one of her people both at once. Caught off guard, Nisia's dodge was too slow, too late. God's step carried me across the battlefield. I appeared inside the shadow of a set of vertical jaws as they closed around the phoenix. My hand took hers, and we melted back into the etheric pathways. Jolts of bright purple energy ran down my arm and across Nisia. Her jaw was set, her lip curled up in a determined sneer, her eyes still focused on teeth that were no longer there. The ground heaved, and dozens of giant blood-iron fists reached out of the mountainside. They took hold of tentacles and legs, even one wing, trying to hold the monster down. Destruction ate away at black metal fingers and fists, but the monster was flailing. If we can pin it down, my words died in my throat. In the distance, I watched one of the beast's flailing limbs descend toward Boo and Ellie. They were going to be crushed beneath it. The mana of the silver shield that had protected her was already dissipating. My fingers released Nisia's hand, and God's step flared again. The God rune seemed to take an age to activate. Already, my feet were digging into the soft, scorched soil as one part of my mind told me to run while another struggled to find the etheric paths again. Finally, God's step carried me away. I appeared at Ellie's side as Boo attempted to lunge out of the way of the rapidly descending claw. Ether raced into my muscles and limbs as I braced myself. The rough pad of a clawed foot longer than I was tall struck me. My body trembled against the incredible weight and impossible force. My core clenched, forcing out even more ether. Boo was already moving, trying to carry Ellie away, but coiling amethyst flames licked down from the claws like whips, lashing the air and ground with fatal destruction. I reached for them. As my arm stretched out, a lash of destruction wrapped around it. The material of my armor popped and cracked, melting away under the unstoppable consumption. My flesh and bone lasted no longer, and the limb fell away, burning. Silver flashed between me and Ellie, and the weight bearing down on me lessened. Silver light hovered between us. It was once again in the shape of the sword as Aldir had wielded it, lithe and ornate, glowing so bright it was almost hard to look at. A spherical shield of pure mana had erupted from it, knocking the monstrosity's descending claw aside, where it dug a long furrow through the rocky soil. The blood-iron fists were no longer grappling it. Regis was struggling to extricate himself from a pile of lumber where he'd been thrown, bringing several trees down on top of him. Silverlight shifted, becoming the unstrung bow as it fell back into Ellie's startled grip. Boo swung out wide, moving to keep Viria and her dragons between Ellie and the destruction-wreathed monster. Ether constricted in the air, and our opponent trembled, suddenly slow. I felt Sylvie's concentration as she struggled to bind it in a fist of withheld time. Regis was in the air again. He slammed into the quaking creature, gripping it just beneath one head and pulling the neck back, revealing the deep wound he'd made during his last attack. His control over destruction was keeping him safe, letting him linger within the monstrosity's aura. Zelena had organized her leviathans. They were huddled together, working to conjure some mana art. The dell swelled with water attribute mana, making it suddenly smell like the shore. Their focus was the exposed wound. Across the battlefield, Zelena's eyes met mine. There was no fear there, no chaos of muddled thought. She was in control, both of herself and her hunting party. She recognized that we couldn't kill it, not yet. We needed a plan to prevent it from continuing to spawn new and stronger incarnations of itself first. Conjuring a new etheric blade in my remaining hand, I adjusted my footing. One of the dragon-like heads bit down on Regis. I felt his fear and fury, but also his hunger, for pain, for blood, for destruction. The God rune sustained him, and his mastery of its edict countered that of our opponents. The sky darkened above us, gray and black shot through with the red of fire attribute mana. That mana swiftly condensed into balls of white-hot fire and fell as meteors, bombarding the monstrosity one after another. Most dissolved in the destruction, but a few punched ragged holes in the expansive wings exploded against its armored back, eliciting blistering cries of pain and rage from the creature. As one, the leviathans lunged and spun in a kind of dance. A wave of mana swept forward, but the visible manifestation of the spell was so subtle that I almost missed it even with Realmheart and King's Gambit. A wafer-thin crescent of mana carved toward the exposed, wounded neck. Violet flames leapt up to reach it, but the wave of surrounding mana battered the destruction, unable to douse it but feeding it while protecting the crescent. The spell sliced through the fire, and then through the neck. I swept my weapon upward, from my hip to my shoulder. The etheric pathways opened, and a bright purple line of etheric light cut through several points at once. Burning blood erupted from a dozen wounds. 2 of the 4 long necks and heads collapsed like fallen trees. 1 small wing fluttered away from the bulbous body. A leg buckled, limp and dragging. Time returned to normal. The 2 remaining heads roared. The creature reared back on 4 of its 6 thick legs, its avian claws digging at the air, the many tentacles snapping around it furiously. Sylvie was flagging, her repeated use of her Avam arts draining her power. Regis flew in circles around the wounded monster, countering its destruction as best he could. Chul hung back, flinging spells with the others, unable to risk approaching for a physical strike. Ellie fired golden arrows of protective energy at any Asura who was caught in the waves of gusting destruction fire that were still devouring the mountainside, giving them a moment to escape. With one layer of my mind, I tracked the efforts of the Asuras to keep the monstrosity pinned down with spellfire while avoiding its destruction. Zelena and Riven led the effort, shouting orders and ensuring the attacks didn't kill it, though I was uncertain if that was even possible. With another, I kept myself moving, helping however I could without dealing any more direct damage to our opponent. The rest of my mind turned to the problem of these incarnations. I was reminded of the relictums, where the etheric beasts could be respawned indefinitely. If that was by design, where had this creature come from? It seemed possible, though unlikely, that the ancient Asuras who created Epheotis manufactured this questing beast, seeding its potential in the magic of this place. Also possible was the fact that our quarry formed here from the interplay of Asuran mana and the ether pressing into Epheotis through the barrier, out of the etheric realm. The shape of it, its grotesque and tortured nature, was like a physical manifestation of the anger ether carried, which fate had described. Simultaneously, I considered 2 other sparks of new insight that were potentially relevant to the battle. First, destruction. I needed to be able to separate the endless consumption from the Asuras. My arm was still regrowing, but even the Asura couldn't match my own healing abilities. It was only a matter of time before the monstrosity's destruction began to consume them, one by one. It was essential that I cordon it off somehow, limiting its capability to continue shedding the violet flames. It hadn't been long since I came up with the plan to avoid Agrona's notice inside a pocket dimension, and that idea hovered close to the surface of my many-layered thoughts. I'd formed such a pocket dimension twice now. First, almost by accident, inspired by the Jinn's runic magic in a moment of pure desperation. Second, more purposefully, to hide myself inside Sylvia's lair between the Beast Glades and the Elenoir Wastes. This second pocket dimension hadn't been placed there out of sentimentality, however. The mark of Sylvia's will still existed inside her. Hidden refuge. I no longer had her will inside my core, and so I'd need her spark, that indentation she'd left in the mana through her months-long teleportation ritual and time-stop spells, to form a second pocket dimension. I had no piece of Sylvia here to use as a catalyst to conjure a pocket dimension to cage the beast, which meant I needed another way. But we were close to the barrier that separated Epheotis from the etheric realm. I'd felt that barrier in Everburn at the fountain, and again along the shore of the Leviathan village, Ecclesia. Here, too, on the Phoenix's ever-climbing mountain. Epheotis was itself, in some way, a pocket dimension. Still connected to the physical realm in which my world existed, but protected by a barrier that affected reality itself, containing space and time and life all together. It was then, between one moment and the next, the many layers of my mind working together like the toothed cogs of a complex machine, that I understood what to do. Fall back, I shouted. To me, I thought directly to Regis. Sylve, stay with Elle. I need you outside the barrier. Both my companions shuddered as they were inundated with many thoughts at once, but I withheld the worst of the effect, focusing my message and intent. While I was offering direction, I was also pouring out purified ether and molding it. The hybridized monstrosity beat its remaining wings and threw itself into the air. Twin mouths drooled burning black spittle as they roared, and the baying of hounds grew so loud it threatened to overwhelm King's Gambit. Mana, heavy and warm as a blanket, settled over me, deadening the horrible noise. I glanced back, looking at Ellie. She was focused on controlling the mana around me, forming a sort of buffer to absorb the sound. I winked at her, then stepped forward. The world began to ripple and run, like I was standing inside a glass globe as the glass was still hot and being blown into shape. The strain was intense, but I was ready for it. The first time I'd formed such a pocket dimension, it had killed me, or would have if not for the sacrifice made by Sylvie. The second had taken hours of careful manipulation as I plucked through the threads of Sylvia's leftover magic. Now, I had only seconds. Sylve, I need time. Through our connection, I felt Sylvie reach for the Avum arts she had been practicing since returning from death. She was tired, the strain of her abilities was significant, but she pushed into the fatigue, drawing insight and inspiration from the lethargy of her own mental faculties and putting that feeling into the ether, which shivered and bucked as it clamped down. The surging beast slowed, its wingbeats suddenly sluggish. A bright spear of light was forming above it, and the mana seized, its flow like grains of sand through an hourglass that had been tipped almost horizontal. A flock of darting, fiery birds of prey went from flitting swiftly toward the beast to a lackadaisical cruise through the air. But Regis winged across the battlefield at speed, transforming as he approached, and the ether continued to swarm, picking up speed instead of slowing down. The globe solidified just as Regis, now little more than a shadowy wisp, passed through my flesh and into my core. The rest of the world vanished. Inside the pocket dimension, it was only me and the beast. An island of crushed and disintegrated ground floated in a sea of colorless and lightless energy, and an open sky reflected across the inside of a plain steel sphere. The monstrosity slammed against the border of my pocket dimension, shaking it. The flames of destruction spilled across the steel surface, but there was no physical matter to devour. It was simply an end, and that was where destruction itself stopped. The beast clawed its way across the interior, frantic. One head lashed out, biting at nothing. The other turned toward me. Its wings beating and pushing its body against the interior of the pocket dimension, the beast roared and unleashed a jet of purple fire. Violet fire erupted across my body. Within my core, Regis connected the destruction Godron to me, conjuring an aura of destruction through my flesh. The destruction surrounding me chewed on the destruction attacking me, and the two opposing forces devoured each other. I flashed across the small pocket dimension a second later as the beast crashed down on me, its remaining claws and teeth rending and tearing at the charged air I left behind. "It's just you and me now," I said, doubtful that the horrible conglomeration of parts and pieces would hear me over the baying echoing from its distended belly. Realizing my flesh was not under its rending claws, it hesitated, the neck swiveling to look for me. Eyes blazing with destruction narrowed. I gazed up at it from the ground. Its heads hovered over 60 feet above me, swiveling back and forth. Through Sylvie's eyes, I saw the outside of the pocket dimension as well, suddenly quiet, the flames of destruction going dark. The mountain was in ruins, among which the rest of the hunting party stared around in wonder. Sylvie was my tether beyond the pocket dimension, and I was hers within. She felt my probing, heard my needs inside my mind. "Let's finish this hunt," the creature hissed, its wings flapping as it drove itself forward. Then, as suddenly as closing a book, the light inside the pocket dimension went gray, and the beast froze, and the baying of the monsters in its belly went blessedly silent. "It's easier, a bit," Sylvie thought through her concentration. "The space is so much smaller, and it's just the three of you. I can hold this, for a minute. Maybe two." It wasn't long, but I knew she was doing everything she could. I turned my King's Gambit enhanced faculties fully to the second new point of insight. The previous evening, when sitting before the fire after everyone else bedded down for the evening, I'd made progress on a long lingering idea. With God's step, I'd opened one of the points through which I could step to travel the etheric pathways, leaving it open. Ether had trickled through, turning our campfire purple. I had, effectively, poked a hole directly through from this reality into the etheric dimension. Unknowingly, I'd been using the etheric pathways to travel through the ether realm for some time. After learning about this connection, I'd theorized I could open my own pathways into the ether realm, but last night had been my first step in that direction. Now, I needed to go much farther. With time stopped within the bubble of my pocket dimension, I began. Theoretically, something inside the monstrosity was conjuring or generating these new incarnations. Out of its death, an even stronger version of itself was born. With each rebirth, it not only grows stronger but seemed to take on mutilated characteristics of its hunters, us, even including a mastery of destruction when I used the aspect to kill it. Even after everything I'd learned, I didn't understand how this was possible, but I hadn't dedicated much of my processing power to figuring it out. More important than how it happened, was how I could stop it. Returning to the night before, I reached for that feeling I'd had in front of the fire, before Sylvie's dream interrupted me. Again, with God's step showing me the individual points connected by the etheric pathways, I imagined a hole between the etheric realm and my pocket dimension. This time, I searched for a point of connection within the distended guts of the horrid, frozen beast. I probed for the point, feeling and listening as 3 steps had taught me, more confident now but knowing that time was running out. Faint and distant, barely sensible through Sylvie's Avum art stopping time and the motionless flames of destruction, a hole opened. Before, ether leaked into Epheotis from beyond. Now, with the beast itself acting like a cork, something else tried to move out, into the ether realm. The hole wasn't big enough yet, and so I pulled harder, forcing it wider. The fabric between realities resisted. A dark amethyst flame flickered. One wing twitched. A pair of eyes refocused on me. Outside the sphere, Sylvie trembled, her mind was beginning to fracture. So much of my consciousness was dedicated to other things, thoughts operating parallel to my primary focus. I remembered what Zelena had said. Thread by thread, I realigned the branching layers of my mind, emptying my head of any thought except absolute focus on the hole punctured between realms. It widened slightly. The beast loomed, inching forward, fighting against Sylvie's control. Cold realization hit me. There was one other thing I was focused on, and I lacked the power to do both. Taking a deep breath, I released my hold over the pocket dimension. The sphere containing us burst, and we slammed back into the real world. Sylvie's hold over her spell shattered, and the beast clawed across the ground, its twin heads descending toward me. It lurched to a stop as suddenly as it had started moving again. Both of its heads craned back and down toward its bulging torso. Suddenly, it slumped over onto its back and began clawing at its own belly. Inside it, the baying continued, but it was doused, dull. Distant. I held the point open inside its body. I couldn't see what was happening inside the beast, but I could feel it clearly. The portal was drawing the stillborn future incarnations through, ripping them out of this world. Each one burned with the spark of destruction that I had put in its flesh when the last incarnation had died. Weak and without their potential, these potential future beasts burned. One by one, then by 10, then by the hundreds. 1,000, then 1,000. It was impossible to tell. But destruction ate them all in the cold void of the etheric realm. Around me, the Asuras were shouting. Ellie was shouting, but I couldn't process their words. My entire mind was focused completely and perfectly on a single task, holding open the hole between realms. The flames of its destruction had turned inward and were now devouring the beast itself. And still, with a portal in its guts and destruction underneath its scales, it seemed as if it couldn't or wouldn't die. Its claws reached for me. Tail tentacles lashed and cut in every direction. The jaws of its 2 remaining heads stretched out toward me. Basilisks, phoenixes, dragons, and leviathans alike surged to my defense, slamming the monstrosity with everything they had. Bolts and bullets and shapeless manifestations of complex mana cut, burned, and burrowed into its flesh, widening the beast's growing wounds and forcing it away from me. A leviathan was caught beneath one huge foot, crushing the man to the ground beneath destruction-infused claws. Zelena's twin short swords melted as they carved through the beast's leg, severing it and sending it crashing down the slope. Regis jumped into the leviathan's flesh, shrouding him from the destruction that would have consumed him. Viria conjured a curved shield that separated me from the beast, but a barbed tail hooked her through the leg, slamming her to the ground and sending her spinning into a cliff. Her body vanished into the rubble. Dozens of blood iron crescents rained down on the beast, severing tentacles and pinning one of its necks to the ground. The remaining claws dug great furrows as the second head snapped closed right in front of me, spraying me with destruction-flecked spittle. Chul rushed forward, heedless of the violet flames spilling from the beast's skin. His round-headed maul blazed with phoenix fire as he drove it down and through the pinned head. The beast's skull broke open and shattered, spilling out a black mush in place of brains. The last remaining head pulled back, letting out a tortured scream even as violet fire jumped to Chul's skin. His chest and arms were ablaze in an instant. A golden arrow flew past me, aimed at his back. When it struck, a shining barrier wrapped around him, momentarily giving the destruction something else to burn and pushing it back from his flesh. I tried to form the ether and mana to draw it away from him, but I couldn't spare any concentration, could barely move or I'd risk losing control of the portal. Destruction devoured the black scales and flesh, revealing dark muscle and bright bones. Another incarnation clawed through the meat, bursting its belly, but the portal, a pulsing disk of black and purple, had already consumed the incarnation's lower half. Before it could rip its way free, it was gone. The bones broke down, devoured by purple fire, and then the musculature. Incarnation after incarnation flowed into the portal at its center, crowing with rage and dismay, the cacophony growing softer moment by moment. And then it was silent. The last stillborn horror had been pulled away. Destruction consumed the last of the beast, and then, with no more fuel for its endless hunger, the flames died too, even those surrounding Chul and the wounded Leviathan. I released my god runes with a ragged gasp. The portal faded, and my senses dulled. I sagged to my knees and took long, slow, shuddering breaths. My ears felt clogged, as if I were underwater. Or like it was so silent, my brain was inventing noise to fill the emptiness. Then, insight sparked in my mind, and I came fully awake again. The bright burning eagerness of new knowledge stung my skin. A huge hand took me by the wrist and dragged me to my feet. I found myself looking into Chul's exuberant face as he looked me over for wounds, his attention settling on my severed arm. A golden glow bathed his face and reflected in his eyes, one blue, one orange. I grinned as the new godrune made itself known, connecting to the newly formed insight. Seeming confused by my grin, he stepped back. "Are you well, my brother in vengeance?" As the golden glow of the newly formed godrune receded, I refocused on my surroundings. The mountainside was destroyed. The once idyllic dell was a torn and churned pit. Rock, trees, and soil alike had been devoured by destruction, erasing even the signs of the Asura's mighty spells. The first face I found was Sylvie's. She was sitting in the dirt, caked with sweat and muck, her shoulders rising and falling as she struggled to catch her breath. There was a concerning lack of focus in her eyes, but through our connection, I felt her reach out to assure me. Next, I glanced at Ellie. Her mana signature was greatly diminished. The elixir from Lord of Ignis had been spent, but my sister was in surprisingly good shape, considering the battle she'd just lived through. Nisha was approaching the spot where the beast had burned away. There was a small patch of white on the ground. The rest of the Asuras, it looked as if everyone had survived, although most bore injuries, some severe, gathered in a loose circle around her. She knelt and picked up a small white form. A fiery arrow still stuck out from behind its left shoulder. The young phoenix touched the arrow, and it extinguished in a haze of cinders. Slowly, as if thinking deeply about something, she approached Chul and me. The eyes of every Asura present followed her in patient silence. Looking at me with a complicated fusion of reverence and dread, Nisha held out the small corpse. To the victor, the trophy. I saw her same expression reflected to some extent on the rest of the Asuran faces. We'd passed through fire together. When we left Featherwalk Airy, I had their respect due to my title. Now, that feeling was something much more real and honest, belief. A head rested against the back of my shoulder. I knew it was Sylvie without looking. On my other side, Ellie ran up and took my arm, hugging it to her. Regis stirred within me, hovering near my core as he absorbed ether from it. Chul crossed his arms and beamed. Kin clasped hands and battered backs with tired fists. Leviathans draped their arms around the shoulders of basilisks, while dragons and phoenixes fell together in tired heaps, their triumphant voices ringing across the mountainside.